Long before I ever put on that navy jacket with security stitched across the back, I never pictured myself as the kind of guy who'd spend his nights circling a Walmart parking lot in Fargo, North Dakota. I was 34, too old to still be piecing my life together, but too young to give up. Before Walmart, I had worked at a warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and it paid the bills. When the company downsized, I was one of the first to go. My wife, Kara, was working part-time as a receptionist, and we had a 4-year-old daughter at home who still thought I was the strongest man alive. I couldn't let them see me as weak. The security job came up almost by accident. Walmart hadn't really bothered with overnight guards before, but after a couple of break-ins and graffiti sprawled across the outer walls, management decided they needed someone on the lot. I didn't have many options, so I said yes. The job itself was as dull as you might imagine. I drove around the icy lot in a little golf cart that rattled so bad I could feel it in my bones. Most nights I chased off bored teenagers who thought the loading dock made a great hangout, or drunks who wandered in at 2 in the morning looking for cigarettes. I'd go inside once an hour, walk through the empty aisles, and nod to the exhausted stockers pushing pallets down lanes of cereal and paper towels. The paycheck kept us afloat, but the hours gutted me. I lived on 4 hours of sleep, and Kara and I fought more than we ever had. She wanted me present, awake, helping with homework, sharing dinner like a real family. I wanted that too, but bills didn't care about bedtime stories. It was the winter of 2011, the kind where snow piled so high it buried cars, and the cold cut through you even under 3 layers. The world outside looked like it had been frozen mid-breath. On nights when the storms rolled in, the parking lot felt like another planet, empty, white and endless under buzzing floodlights. The first time something felt wrong, it was small. Around 2:47 a.m., I saw the fluorescent lights flicker on inside the garden section. The gates were locked and no one should have been back there. I grabbed my flashlight and went in. The place was dead quiet. My boots echoed against the concrete. "Maintenance?" I called. No answer. When I clicked off my flashlight, I swear I saw a figure standing by the light switch. Just a tall shadow, but enough to make my chest tighten. I clicked the beam back on. Nothing. I told myself I was tired. That exhaustion plays tricks on your head. And maybe it did. But something inside me shifted that night. I started carrying the flashlight tighter, like it was the only weapon I had against whatever I thought I saw. Over the next week, the small things kept happening. Lights flicked on in empty aisles. I'd hear faint footsteps in electronics even, though the department was closed. Once, as I was making my way past the toy section, I heard what sounded like a child laughing just for a second. The aisle was deserted. I never told anyone. The stalkers already looked at me like some washed-up rent-a-cop. If I started talking about ghosts, I'd never live it down. Instead, I swallowed it, convinced myself it was sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation messes with your head, I muttered whenever my pulse spiked. The worst part was the sensation, like someone was always walking a few steps behind me. The aisles are long, straight lanes where your reflection bends on polished floors, and it doesn't take much for your imagination to make another shape out of your own shadow. Still, I'd catch myself spinning around, heart hammering, just to find nothing there. At home, Kara noticed. She asked why I flinched when she touched my shoulder, why I sat awake on the couch even after sunrise. I lied and said the job was just boring me to death. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. One night, I stopped by the employee restrooms near the stockroom. I pushed the door open and froze. The sound of a toilet flushing echoed inside. Nothing strange, except those toilets were motion activated. I called out, "Anyone in here?" Silence. I checked each stall. Empty. I should have left. But something told me to sit in one stall, scrolling through my phone just to calm down. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself there was nothing to fear. A few minutes passed in silence. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate knocking. From the stall beside me. My skin went cold. I leaned down, just enough to peek under. A pair of black work shoes faced directly toward me, motionless. I held my breath, staring at those shoes. Then, against every ounce of reason, I tilted my head up. A man, tall, impossibly tall, was peering over the stall wall. His face was gaunt, pale under the fluorescent lights. His eyes met mine for a second, just long enough to sink a terror in me I can't explain. Then he jerked back, vanishing. Adrenaline surged. I kicked open the neighboring stall, flashlight raised like a weapon. The stall was empty. No man, no shadow, just those shoes sitting neatly on the floor like they'd been placed there. My breath came fast and ragged. I backed out, stumbling, into the hallway, then bolted to the golf cart outside. My hands shook so hard I couldn't fit the keys into the ignition. My breath fogged the air and I whispered to myself, "It's just sleep, I'm just tired." But the words rang hollow. For days after, I couldn't stop replaying it. The way he leaned over, the hollow eyes, the impossible height. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the shoes, how do you explain shoes? I thought about telling my manager, but what would I say? Hey, I saw a giant man in the bathroom, but he vanished. I'd be laughed out of the store, so I stayed quiet. At home, things got worse. I jumped when Kara opened a door. I scanned corners of rooms like I was still patrolling. My daughter asked why Daddy looked sad all the time. I didn't have an answer. A week later, I walked past the restrooms again and I froze. The door was half open, swinging slightly. I swear I heard a faint tap, tap, tap echoing inside. I didn't go in. I couldn't. I turned and walked away, pretending I hadn't heard it. By the end of that winter, I was unraveling. Every shadow looked like it might move. Every echo made me flinch. The other guards joked about me being jumpy, but they didn't know. I couldn't tell them. One night, during another snowstorm, I parked the cart near the entrance and sat there staring at the glowing windows. I thought about walking in and quitting on the spot, but then I pictured Kara, the bills stacked on the kitchen table, and my daughter's preschool tuition. Quitting wasn't an option. The tall man never appeared again, not like that night. But the fear stayed with me. Sometimes in the empty aisles, I thought I saw him at the end, too tall to be real, waiting. I'd blink and he'd be gone. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired, but deep down I knew I wasn't. There had been something in that stall with me, something that didn't belong in this world. In spring, I finally asked to switch to fewer night shifts. I told management it was wearing on me. They didn't argue. Night guards weren't exactly hard to replace. Within a month, I was only working weekends. By summer, I'd left altogether. I never told Kara the truth. I just said the job was bad for my health. She was relieved. Slowly, the weight lifted from our marriage, but the fear never left me entirely. Even now, years later, when I drive past that Walmart on 13th Avenue, I can't help but glance at the glowing windows. Part of me expects to see him standing there, impossibly tall, waiting for someone else to look up. Looking back, I don't know if what I saw was real or the product of exhaustion, stress, and fear. But I learned something that winter. Ignoring your limits only makes you weaker. You can't sacrifice sleep, health, and peace of mind forever without consequences. I thought I was being strong by pushing through, but strength isn't about grinding yourself into the ground. It's about knowing when to step back. Some things in life are scarier than ghosts. Losing your family, losing yourself, pretending everything is fine when it isn't. If there's a lesson in my story, it's this. Take care of yourself before the shadows in your life grow taller than you can face. In 2016, I was 20 years old, juggling college classes at Sinclair Community College in Dayton and barely keeping my head above water. Financial aid only stretched so far, and my parents reminded me constantly that if I wanted to make something of myself, I had to finish my degree. They didn't really understand the anxiety I carried around. The way even small responsibilities sometimes felt like boulders pressing down on my chest. But dropping out wasn't an option. So, when the bills piled up, I did the thing I swore I never would. I filled out an online application for Walmart. The store on 82nd Street wasn't glamorous. The commercials on TV showed smiling families and perfectly stocked shelves, but when you worked there, you saw the other side. The flickering lights, the sticky floors, the endless stream of customers who looked at you like you were less than human. Nights were the strangest. The crowd changed. By 10 o'clock, families disappeared, replaced by people who seemed like they had nowhere else to be. I was hired for nights, mostly cashier, and sometimes restocking in soft lines. My shift usually ran from 5 p.m. until close, sometimes later, if the registers were backed up. I told myself it was temporary, just a way to keep the rent paid on my tiny apartment near campus and buy enough groceries to get me through the semester. The people I worked with were a mixed bag. There was Angela, a middle-aged single mom who worked 2 jobs and still managed to smile at everyone. There was Corey, a lanky kid not much older than me, who spent half his time sneaking his phone out to text his girlfriend. And then there were the regulars, strange customers who came in so often we started making up stories about them. There was Duke, the tattoo artist whose shop was failing. He bought rubbing alcohol and needles in bulk, and his arms were covered in faded ink that looked like it had been done in someone's basement. There was the guy from the piercing kiosk who always smelled faintly like burnt metal and bought peroxide by the gallon. And there was this older, well-dressed couple who came in pretending to be above it all. They'd sneer at cheap junk, but then quietly ask me to order explicit DVDs online for in-store pickup. I never judged, but I always thought it was funny, the public mask people wear and the private truth they hide. Most nights blurred together, ringing up groceries, answering dumb questions, counting the minutes until my shift ended. But there was one Tuesday night in October that changed everything. It was around 11:30 and the store was quiet. I was behind the counter near the garden center, scrolling through a training module on my register. That's when I heard the doors slam open. A tall, gangly man came storming in, clutching a crumpled plastic bag. He didn't look like the regulars. His clothes were dirty, his hair greasy, and his eyes were wild. He dropped the bag on the counter with a thud. "This piece of crap is defective. I want my money back." I looked inside. A rubber Halloween mask with one of those little pumps attached. It was deflated and clearly used. My stomach tightened. I already knew what I had to say, and I already knew he wasn't going to like it. I tried to keep my voice even. "I'm sorry, sir. Company policy says we can't take returns on used masks." The man slammed his palm against the counter hard enough to make the register screen flicker. I jumped. "Do I look like I care about your policy?" he hissed. His face was red, his lips trembling. I glanced down the row of empty checkout lanes, hoping for backup. Angela was a few registers over, her eyes wide, frozen like a deer in headlights. Corey stood by the self-checkouts, whispering something I couldn't hear. Nobody moved. The man leaned forward, his breath sour with stale cigarettes. Before I could react, his hand shot out and grabbed me by the collar of my blue vest. He yanked me forward, slamming the side of my head lightly against the counter's edge. My vision blurred. Then he pressed the rubber pump against my temple. "You see this? You think I won't use it on you?" My throat went dry. It was just a cheap mask pump, but in that moment my brain convinced me it could be anything. A knife, a hidden weapon, some kind of chemical. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Okay, I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please, just calm down. We can work this out." His grip loosened slightly, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. I could see the veins pulsing in his neck. "Give me my money," he said, low and deadly. I fumbled for the register keys, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped them. I punched in the override code, pulled open the drawer, and slid out a handful of bills. My stomach churned as I placed them on the counter. He snatched the money with one hand, stuffing it into his pocket. while his other hand lingered near my collar. For a terrifying second, I thought he might hit me, or worse. But then he let go, tossed the deflated mask back into the bag and snarled, "Next time, don't waste my time." He walked out as suddenly as he'd stormed in. The automatic doors hissed shut behind him, leaving nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights and my own ragged breathing. I stood frozen, tears blurring my vision. Angela finally hurried over, her voice shaking. "Laura, are you okay?" I tried to answer, but all that came out was a choked sob. The police didn't arrive until 20 minutes later. By then, the man was long gone. They took my statement, asked for the security footage, and promised they'd look into it. But I could see it in their faces. They had bigger problems to deal with than a guy threatening a cashier with a Halloween mask. I went home that night in a daze. My apartment felt smaller than ever, the shadows longer. Every sound made me flinch. The hum of the fridge, the pipes creaking, even my own phone buzzing on the nightstand. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of his face, his red eyes staring through me, the pump pressing harder and harder against my head. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I'd run a marathon. The next day at work, I tried to act normal. Customers didn't know what had happened. To them, I was just another cashier in a blue vest, smiling and asking if they wanted their receipt. But every time the doors slid open, I caught my breath. What if he came back? What if he was watching, waiting? Angela pulled me aside during our break. "You don't have to pretend, Laura," she said softly. "That was terrifying. Anyone would be shaken up." "I just need to get through it," I muttered, picking at the wrapper of my granola bar, but it wasn't that simple. The anxiety I'd battled for years came roaring back, sharper than ever. My chest felt tight all the time. I kept replaying the moment in my head, his hand on my collar, the sound of my head hitting the counter, the wild look in his eyes. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. On Friday night, I told Mr. Garza I couldn't keep working nights. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. "But you should file a formal complaint. Don't just walk away from this. Make them know what you went through." I nodded, but deep down I knew I wouldn't. Walmart had a way of swallowing people's stories. I was just one cashier among hundreds. What did my fear matter to a company that measured everything in sales and profit? I clocked out that night for the last time. My vest felt heavy when I folded it and slid it into the drop bin. I walked through the sliding doors, out into the cool October air, and for the first time in months, I didn't have to turn back, but the fear didn't vanish. At home, I found myself checking the locks 3 times before bed. I avoided grocery stores late at night. Crowded places made me nervous, but empty ones were worse. I tried to tell my mom about it over the phone. She sighed and said, "Honey, jobs are hard. You can't let one bad customer chase you off." But it wasn't just one bad customer. It was what he represented, that no matter how hard you tried to follow the rules, someone could still decide to make you their target. And in that moment, you were powerless. Years later, I still think about that night. I never saw the man again, and the police never followed up. He probably went on with his life, maybe threatening someone else, maybe fading into the background like so many others. But I carried him with me. Not his face, not his voice, but the fear. The knowledge that safety is fragile, that it can be shattered in seconds by someone else's anger. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd refused him, if I'd shouted for help, if someone else had stepped in. Would he have hurt me? Or would he have backed down anyway? I'll never know. All I know is that I quit Walmart that week and never looked back. I finished school, found a job that didn't leave me shaking every night, and slowly rebuilt a sense of normal. But I still avoid fluorescent-lit aisles after dark. I still flinch when strangers raise their voices. Danger doesn't always announce itself with weapons or sirens. Sometimes it walks in with a cheap mask and a bad attitude, and sometimes all you can do is survive. I still remember the fall of 2004 as if it happened last week. I was 16, skinny as a fence post, and still figuring out who I was supposed to be. My dad had been hurt in a construction accident the year before, and he hadn't been able to work since. The doctors said his back might never be the same. He spent most of his days in a recliner watching old westerns, swallowing painkillers, and trying not to let us see how much it killed him inside to feel useless. My mom picked up as many shifts as she could at a diner off the highway, but it wasn't enough. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter like snowdrifts. That's when I decided to get a job. I landed at Walmart on 82nd Street in Lubbock, Texas. Minimum wage, part-time, evenings only. I stocked shelves, wrangled carts, and sometimes ran a register when things got busy. The work wasn't glamorous, but I told myself it mattered. Every paycheck I brought home felt like proof that I was pulling my weight. My friends from school teased me. "Man, you're wasting your weekends pushing carts for old ladies," they'd say. Maybe they were right, but when I saw Mom crying quietly at the kitchen table after paying bills, I knew I was doing the right thing. Closing shifts were always the hardest. By 9:30, the store started emptying out, but there was always that last wave of cranky customers. They'd come through half drunk or half asleep, snapping at us because we were bagging too slow or didn't have their brand of cereal. Mr. Garza, our evening manager, was a short, broad man with a calm voice and the patience of a saint. He always told me, "Ryan, you let the water roll off your back, you don't take it home with you." Easy for him to say. It was late October, and the air outside carried that dry, dusty chill West Texas always gets in the fall. Halloween decorations lined the seasonal aisle. Cheap plastic masks, bags of candy, and fake spiderwebs stretched across cardboard tombstones. Something about those aisles always made the store feel different. Like it wasn't just closing time, it was closing in. On October 27th, I was assigned to closing again. I remember thinking it felt heavier that night. The store was too quiet. By 10:30, I was facing shelves in grocery, dragging my feet, already dreaming about collapsing into a bed. That's when I first saw him. A man leaned against the checkout lane holding a half-empty beer bottle. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with greasy hair and a sweat-stained shirt. He smelled like alcohol even from a distance. I forced a polite smile and walked over. "Sir, we're closing in 15 minutes. You'll need to check out or head out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He smirked, showing yellowed teeth. "What if I don't, kid?" His voice was rough, slurred, but dangerous in its edge. He slammed the bottle on the conveyor belt and the sound made me jump. Before I could say another word, Mr. Garza appeared beside me, calm as always. "Evening, sir," he said firmly. "Time to go." The man glared at both of us, then chuckled, slow and ugly. He shuffled toward the doors, but before leaving, he spun around. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. "This place ain't seen the last of me," he said, and then stumbled out. My hands shook a little as I exhaled. I told myself drunks came and went all the time, but something about his stare clung to me long after he disappeared into the night. When you're 16, you don't think much about danger. You think you're untouchable, that the world only happens to other people. But that night cracked something inside me. Mr. Garza noticed me staring toward the doors after the man left. "Shake it off," he said, giving me a pat on the shoulder. "He's just talk." I nodded, but my eyes kept drifting back. The glass doors reflected the store's fluorescent glow, and for a second I thought I saw movement outside. I took a step closer, and that's when I heard it. A dull thump against the glass. My breath caught. The doors shuttered, as if someone had rammed them from outside. I froze. By the time I reached the entrance, there was nothing. Just my reflection, looking pale and nervous. I tried to laugh at myself. Maybe the wind had rattled the doors. Maybe the glass was settling. But the hollow feeling in my stomach didn't buy it. I went back to straightening shelves, trying to drown the unease. But minutes later, the sound came again, this time louder, sharper. Crash. I whipped my head around. The front window near the customer service desk spiderwebbed into cracks before shattering completely. Glass rained onto the tile. The sound ripped through the quiet store, and for a second, no one moved. Then Mr. Garza came running from the back, phone already in his hand. I stood frozen, staring at the gaping hole where the window had been. Outside, under the parking lot lights, I saw them. 3 figures. My stomach dropped when I recognized one, the drunk. He was leaning against a dented sedan, grinning at me like he'd won something. The other 2 were younger, maybe early 20s, rough-looking with baseball caps and cigarettes glowing between their fingers. One of them dragged his hand across the hood of a car. My car. My beat-up '96 Ford Taurus that had barely survived the summer heat. "Mr. Garza," I whispered, my voice shaking. "They're out there. That's my car." He didn't hesitate, just pressed the phone to his ear and told the dispatcher. We had vandals breaking windows. I wanted to believe that was all they were. Vandals. But when one of them cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, "We'll be waiting, boy," I knew this was personal. My chest tightened. Why me? I'd done nothing but ask him to leave. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he just picked me at random. Maybe he saw weakness in my face. Whatever it was, he wasn't letting it go. The police dispatcher told Mr. Garza to lock the doors and stay inside. But standing there, I couldn't ignore the way the drunk kept staring at me. His eyes never left mine, even as one of his friends laughed and kicked at the tire of my car. I stepped outside before I could stop myself. The October air slapped me in the face. My voice shook but carried farther than I expected. "The cops are on their way. Leave now." For a moment, none of them moved. The drunk tilted his head, still grinning. Then he raised one finger, dragged it slowly across his throat and spit on the pavement. The gesture said more than any words could. I wanted to run back inside, but something in me wouldn't let me show fear. My fists were clenched, even though I knew if they charged me, I wouldn't stand a chance. Then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they slid into their car. The engine roared, and the sedan sped off into the night. I stood frozen, watching the taillights vanish, my body buzzing with adrenaline. Mr. Garza grabbed my arm. "Are you crazy? Don't go outside like that again. You could have been hurt." I couldn't just stand there, I muttered, my voice cracking. "You can, and you will," he said firmly. "Next time, you think before you act." By the time the police arrived, the men were long gone. Officers swept the lot, took statements, and promised to keep an eye out. They asked me to describe the drunk. I told them everything I could. His hair, his clothes, the way his teeth looked when he smiled. They nodded, writing it all down, but their faces told me they weren't optimistic. Later that night, an officer called my mom to let her know what had happened. She nearly dragged me out of the job right then and there. "Ryan, no paycheck is worth this," she said, tears in her eyes. But we needed the money. I begged her to let me keep working. I promised I'd be careful. She finally agreed, but only after making me swear I'd quit if anything like it happened again. The drunk was arrested 2 days later for property damage, but the other 2 vanished into the cracks. And even with him behind bars, I never felt safe again. Every closing shift, I scanned the parking lot. Every shadow felt like it was hiding someone. Walking to my car, I checked behind me 3-4 times, convinced I'd see him leaning against the hood again, grinning. He never came back, but his absence didn't feel like relief. It felt like waiting for a shoe to drop. By Christmas, life had returned to normal on the surface. I worked my shifts, I went to school, I helped Mom pay bills. But something in me had changed. I wasn't the same carefree kid anymore. Every loud noise made me jump. Every stranger who lingered too long in the store set my nerves on edge. One night I caught my reflection in the freezer doors, eyes wide, jaw tight, scanning the aisle like a soldier in a war zone. That was when I realized it wasn't just about that drunk. It was about me. Danger doesn't have to follow through to change you. Sometimes just the promise of it is enough. Looking back, that night in October taught me more than any high school class ever did. I learned how fragile safety really is, how quickly normal life can shatter like glass. But I also learned that courage isn't about acting fearless, it's about standing your ground even when your knees are shaking. At 16, I thought the drunk man held all the power. But in truth, the power was in how I chose to face him. Fear doesn't disappear, it lingers. But if you don't let it own you, it can shape you into someone stronger. That's the lesson I've carried ever since. By the time I hit 39, my body already felt older than it should. 12-hour patrol shifts had a way of grinding you down. Your back aches from the cruiser seat, your stomach turns from bad diner coffee, and your head spins from everything you've seen. That night in October 2021, I'd been running from call to call on the south side of Little Rock. Domestic disputes, a shoplifting gone wrong, a minor wreck that clogged traffic for 2 hours. It felt like it never ended. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I let my head rest against the steering wheel for a minute. My wife Karen called just as I was about to head inside. "Danny," she said, "we're out of cooking oil and paper towels. Could you swing by Walmart?" I closed my eyes. I'd been dreaming about the couch and a cold beer all afternoon, but I also knew better than to argue. "Yeah," I sighed. "I'll grab it." So, I turned the cruiser around and drove toward Baseline Road. That Walmart had become a second home for me over the years. I'd responded to fights in its parking lot, stolen goods, stuffed under jackets, even a stabbing once near the garden center. To the public, it was a place to grab milk and toilet paper. To me, it was another beat where trouble always seemed to find a home. The rain was steady as I pulled in around 10:15. The lot was only half full, yellow lights casting sickly reflections in the puddles. I walked in, nodded to a couple tired-looking employees, grabbed the oil and paper towels, and checked out quick. I didn't even take off my badge or my vest. I wasn't working, but habits die hard. Pushing my cart back out into the rain, I caught sight of them. 4 young men under a flickering lamppost at the far edge of the lot, leaning against a beat-up sedan. Smoke curled up from their hands. Weed, not cigarettes. One of them hurled an empty bottle that shattered across the asphalt. Another hollered, something crude at a woman walking past. I told myself to just keep walking. I was off duty. I had groceries. But old instincts don't die easy. I veered their way, flashing my badge. "All right, fellas," I said, keeping my voice firm but even. "That's enough. Wrap it up and move along." One of them smirked. "Relax, officer. We're just hanging." "Out?" Another muttered under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. "Pig thinks he owns the lot." I didn't flinch. "You don't need to be causing trouble out here. Let's go." For a moment, I thought they'd shrug it off. Then, the tallest one popped the trunk and pulled out a hockey stick. He swung it hard into my shoulder before I even had time to react. Pain shot through me, white hot. I staggered back, hand going to my holster. By the time I drew my sidearm, they'd already piled into the sedan. Tires screamed against wet pavement as they tore out of the lot. I stood there in the rain, clutching my throbbing shoulder. Groceries spilled across the asphalt. Off duty or not, I'd just been reminded. Trouble didn't care if you were ready for it. At the ER, the nurse poked at my shoulder and declared it a deep bruise, nothing broken. "You'll be sore for a while," she said. Karen met me there, eyes blazing with that mix of worry and anger only a spouse can manage. "Danny, you should have just walked away," she scolded. "I couldn't," I muttered. "They were harassing people." "You're not Superman," she shot back. "You can't take on every punk with an attitude." I promised her I'd rest, that I'd come straight home. But as I drove back along Highway 70, rain hammering the windshield, something made me slow down. On the shoulder, hazard lights blinked in the dark. Same dented sedan, paint peeling, bumper scuffed. My pulse quickened. I pulled over, radioed dispatch. "Unit 214, I've got eyes on a suspicious vehicle, Highway 70 eastbound shoulder. Matches description from earlier incident, requesting backup." No movement inside. Driver's window rolled down, rain soaking the seats. I stepped out, carefully, flashlight in one hand, my other hand hovering near my holster. Peering inside, my stomach tightened. On the passenger seat, 2 spent shell casings glinted, under the beam of my light. No driver, no passengers, just silence. "Wiring to dispatch," I said, voice steady. "Vehicle appears abandoned, casings visible, requesting expedited backup." That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the wet brush just beyond the tree line. Slow, deliberate. "Police!" I barked, my voice echoing across the empty highway. "Show yourself." No reply, just the whisper of leaves. Then, gunfire. 3 sharp cracks split the night. I dove behind the sedan as bullets shattered the rear glass, shards spraying over. Me heart hammering, I whispered into the radio. Shots fired! Shots fired! Need backup now." Minutes stretched like hours. Rain pelted down, mixing with shards of glass on my vest. My shoulder ached with every breath, but I kept low, eyes fixed on the tree line. Silence settled again. No footsteps, no gunfire, just the rain. I held my Glock tight, every muscle screaming for movement but afraid of making the wrong one. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Relief washed through me, but I didn't move. I'd been in enough standoffs to know quiet didn't mean safe. The first cruiser screeched up behind mine, red and blue lights cutting through the storm. 2. Officers fanned out, rifles raised. "Danny, you good?" One of them shouted. Behind the suspect vehicle, I called back. "Took fire from the woods." They advanced, sweeping the tree line with flashlights. Within seconds, more units arrived, boots splashing through puddles, radios crackling. The air was alive with energy, but the woods remained silent. Then, without warning, the sedan roared to life. Tires screamed as it lurched forward, fishtailing across slick pavement. "Suspect vehicle moving," I shouted, ducking low. Units gave chase, headlights piercing the rain. I stayed behind, shoulder throbbing, Glock still raised. My gut told me what didn't add up. The shots hadn't come from the sedan. They'd come from the woods. Radio chatter buzzed as the chase unfolded. Suspect heading eastbound, speeds exceeding 80, another unit reported. I leaned against my cruiser, rain soaking my hair, my uniform plastered to my skin, my backup. Returned after 10 long minutes, the sedan boxed in miles down the road. The driver, a pale, twitchy young man, was hauled out, screaming profanities. In the back seat lay a pistol, same caliber as the casings I'd spotted. But here's what chilled me. When the crime scene team combed the woods where the first shots had come from, they found nothing. No casings, no footprints in the mud, no second shooter, just silence. I knew what I'd heard. I knew the trajectory of those bullets, the way the glass exploded behind me. But with no evidence, it was my word against the dark. Back home, Karen pressed ice to my shoulder, her hands trembling. "Danny, you could have been killed." "I know," I whispered. But I couldn't tell her the part that gnawed at me, that whoever had fired those shots wasn't in custody, that someone was still out there. Weeks passed, but the unease never left me. Every time I drove past that Walmart, I scanned the lot, half expecting to see the dented sedan idling under the flickering lights. The official report closed with a tidy bow. 1 suspect apprehended, weapon recovered, case pending trial. But I knew better. The angles, the sound, the timing, it all told me someone else had been in those woods. I started checking my mirrors more often, parking closer to entrances, carrying the weight of vigilance even off duty. Karen said I was jumpier, quieter. She wasn't wrong. Some nights, lying in bed, I'd hear again the crunch of footsteps in wet brush, the cracks of gunfire cutting, the rain, and I'd wonder if next time I'd be quick enough to duck. Being a cop had taught me danger rarely announces itself politely. Sometimes it waits in the dark, patient. Sometimes it's a group of kids with a hockey stick in a parking lot. Sometimes it's something you can't quite explain. And sometimes it's both. Danger is unpredictable. You can do everything right, follow every protocol, and still find yourself one heartbeat from disaster. But it also taught me something more personal. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about moving anyway, even when the rain is coming down, even when the brush hides shadows you can't name. The truth is, we don't get to choose when trouble finds us. All we can choose is how we face it, and how we carry the scars it leaves behind. In 2009, I was 27 years old and feeling like the world had already chewed me up and spit me out. Before the recession, I had my own small landscaping business. Nothing fancy, just me, a pickup, and a couple of guys I hired in the summer months. We cut grass, planted shrubs, laid mulch. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then the bottom dropped out. People stopped spending money on keeping their yards pretty when they could barely keep their mortgages paid. Calls stopped, bills piled up, and within 6 months I was broke. My girlfriend Lisa was working doubles at a diner just to keep us in our apartment. I hated seeing her exhausted every night while I sat there staring at overdue bills. So when Walmart opened up overnight stocking positions at their Lawrence Road store, I signed up. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But temporary stretched to 3 months, then 6, then almost a year, daytime. Walmart wasn't so bad. Crowded aisles, screaming kids, managers breathing down your neck. At least there was noise and life. But at night, after the mall section closed at 9:30 and the steel gate rolled down between Walmart and the rest of the building, the store felt like a different world. Half the lights were turned off, making the aisles stretch into dim tunnels. You'd hear one cart squeak in the distance or a box drop in another department, and it sounded like thunder. I tried to get used to it. I'd put my headphones in while zoning shelves, pretending I was anywhere else. But no matter what, I always had this gnawing feeling that I wasn't really alone in that store. One night in December, cold air seeping in through the automatic doors, I was stocking soup cans when I noticed movement near the gate. I looked up and saw him. A man stood gripping the bars, staring past me at the ceiling tiles. His hair was long and greasy, hanging over his face. He wore a dirty black and white plaid shirt and sagging jeans. He didn't even look at me, just craned his neck back, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then, without warning, he rattled the gate so violently the sound echoed across the store. "Sir?" My voice cracked. "Can I help you?" Nothing. Just rattling, then stillness. Finally, he turned his head. His eyes met mine, and he stared too long, like he was trying to burn his face into my brain. Then he walked away into the dark mall corridor. I stood frozen, holding a can of tomato soup, my heart pounding. I told myself it was probably a homeless guy looking for a warm place to sleep. Still, the unease stayed. I thought about calling mall security, but my manager's voice rang in my head. "Handle your own section first." So I did. What I always did. Kept my head down and went back to work. But that night was only the beginning. About an hour later, I was in the cereal aisle when the front doors slid open. I looked up, expecting a late-night shopper. Instead, it was him. Same jeans, same skinny build, but the plaid shirt was gone. Now he wore only a plain white t-shirt clinging to his frame. He walked slowly past the carts, and for the first time his eyes locked directly on me. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a polite customer smile. A slow, curling grin that froze me to the spot. I felt my skin prickle. Every instinct in my body screamed to get away. I dropped the box of Cheerios I was holding and ducked into the stockroom, slamming the heavy metal door behind me and locking it. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed my manager. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I whispered into the phone like the man could hear me through the walls. "Come on, pick up, pick up." Still nothing. So I sat there in the dim light of the stockroom, listening. At first, silence. Then the faint sound of the automatic doors sliding open, then closing. and nothing else. I waited another 10 minutes before unlocking the door. The store was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerators. My cart sat where I left it. The cereal box lay on its side. But the man was gone. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined half of it. Maybe he was just some drifter messing around. Maybe the smile was in my head, but something pushed me to check the cameras. When my manager came in, I asked to see the security footage. He rolled his eyes. "What now, Mark?" But I was insistent. We pulled up the footage from the gate around 9:30. There he was, clear as day. Greasy hair, plaid shirt, fingers gripping the bars, staring up at the ceiling like he was waiting for something. Then rattling the gate so hard it shook. "Probably some nut job," my manager muttered. "Keep watching," I said. An hour later, the footage showed the front door sliding open. The same man walked in, plaid shirt gone, white t-shirt on, that grin spreading across his face. Even my manager went pale. "That's unsettling," he admitted, shutting the laptop. Unsettling. That was one word for it. After that night, I couldn't focus on work the same way. Every squeak of a cart made me flinch. Every set of footsteps in another aisle sent me peering around the corner. My coworkers laughed it off when I told them. "You're just tired," one said. "Man, you need a vacation." Maybe they were right. I was working nights, sleeping days, barely seeing Lisa. But deep down, I knew this wasn't exhaustion. That smile had been real. And the way he stared, it wasn't random. For weeks I dreaded going in, but the bills didn't stop, and neither did the schedule. So I kept showing up, praying he wouldn't return. He never did come back, at least, not that I saw. But the fear never left. Every night I scanned the front doors, half expecting him to walk through shirtless and grinning. A month later, I quit. I told Lisa it was the long hours, the bad pay, the exhaustion. She believed me. The truth was, I couldn't stand another night waiting for that man to appear again. Sometimes, when I drive down Lawrence Road and past that Walmart, I glance at the doors, glowing in the dark. And every time, I wonder if he's still out there, wandering. The mall corridors, rattling gates, waiting for someone else to notice him. When I think back on that Sunday afternoon, I realize the story didn't start at the bus stop. It started a year earlier, when I packed 2 suitcases, left Berlin behind, and boarded a plane bound for Buenos Aires. I was 29, restless, and still figuring out what kind of teacher I wanted to be, what kind of woman I wanted to become. Germany felt too familiar, too mapped out. Argentina promised something different: color, noise, challenge, and the kind of adventure you only dream about when you're young enough to believe you're invincible. I came on a cultural exchange program that paired teachers with local schools. My Spanish at the time was clumsy, stitched together from college courses and a language app, but I thought immersion would fix it. During the day, I taught English at a secondary school in Palermo. The kids were bright, loud, often distracted, and endlessly curious about where I came from. I loved their energy, but the program stipend was small. Rent in Buenos Aires, even in the modest apartment I shared with 2 other foreigners, ate away at it quickly. So I picked up part-time shifts at the Walmart Supercenter on Avenida del Libertador. It wasn't glamorous. I bagged groceries, stocked shelves, and learned the rhythm of retail Spanish. "Would you like a bag? The register is closed. Please form a line." My coworkers were kind, though. Most were younger than me, students saving money or mothers picking up extra hours. I was the foreigner with a thick accent, but after a few months they stopped laughing at my mistakes and started correcting me gently. Weekends were hardest. That's when I took extra shifts to save up for trips. I wanted to see Patagonia, Iguazu, Falls, maybe even cross over into Chile before I returned home. I had plans written in a notebook, full of bus routes and hostels circled in red pen. It kept me motivated during the long hours. Life in Buenos Aires wasn't always easy. The city could be overwhelming. The crowds, the traffic, the way sidewalks cracked like old bones. And crime, that was the part I underestimated. Friends and co-workers told me stories. Phones snatched from hands, purses cut open in crowded trains, robberies in broad daylight. I listened, nodded, and promised I'd be careful. But deep down, I thought it wouldn't happen to me. I was cautious. I kept my bag zipped. I didn't flaunt my phone. I avoided dark alleys. Wasn't that enough? I never considered the most vulnerable place might be the most ordinary. A bus stop on a quiet street, just minutes from where I worked. That Sunday was warm, the kind of warmth that clings to your skin, even as the sun begins to drop. My shift ended around 4:45. I clocked out, tied my hair back, and said goodbye to the cashier I often worked with, a girl named Julieta who reminded me of my younger sister. I remember hesitating at the employee entrance, debating whether I should buy something cold to drink before heading out. I decided against it. I was tired. I wanted home, a shower, maybe a call to my parents before the time zones made it too late. The bus stop was only a block away, but I always dreaded it. On weekdays it bustled with people. On Sundays it emptied out by late afternoon. Stores closed early. Families went home for long dinners. The street felt hollow, the kind of hollow that makes every sound echo too loudly. Still, taxis were too expensive, and I had promised myself I'd budget carefully. So I walked to the shelter, sat on the cracked bench, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled without really reading, glancing up now and then for the bus. That was when I saw him, a man walking unsteadily toward me, his clothes ragged, his eyes sharp despite the stagger in his step. At first, I thought he was just another beggar asking for coins, but then his voice hardened and the street around me seemed to fall away. The man stopped a few feet from me. His voice was rough, urgent. "Give me money." I shook my head, automatically trying to stay polite. "I don't have any, sorry." My accent betrayed me instantly. His eyes narrowed. "Everything," he said louder. "Give me everything or I'll kill you." The words landed like a punch to the stomach. For a split second, my mind went blank. I'd read about moments like this, the way your body freezes, the way your brain refuses to believe it's really happening. But it was happening. I felt it in the way his gaze pinned me to the concrete. I clutched my bag closer to my side. My instinct wasn't brave or clever. It was just to make myself small. "I don't want trouble," I whispered. My hands trembled. I could feel my phone in one palm slick with sweat. Calling for help seemed impossible. He stepped closer. I could smell the sourness of alcohol on his breath. His face twitched, caught between anger and desperation. I thought of all the stories my coworkers had told me. Knives pulled in daylight, strangers stripped of bags in seconds. He kept repeating his threat, his voice rising, and each repetition chipped away at the thin wall of calm I was clinging to. I glanced down the street. Empty. Not a single passerby, no shop lights glowing behind glass, only the far-off hum of cars on the main avenue. I had never felt so isolated. Should I run? The thought flashed like lightning. But what if he chased me? What if he had something hidden in his pocket? Screaming seemed useless. Who would hear me here? I stayed frozen until a faint sound reached me, the low growl of an engine. Headlights curved onto the street. A bus. I had never been so grateful for something so ordinary. The man noticed it too. His eyes darted toward the approaching vehicle, then back to me. My chest tightened, but I forced my legs to move. As the bus slowed and hissed to a stop, I darted forward, brushing past him, my bag clutched tight. My heart hammered as I climbed the steps, nearly stumbling in my hurry. Inside, I fumbled with coins, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. The driver's assistant leaned over, his brow furrowed. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was gentle, steadying. I nodded, unable to form words. I took the slip of a ticket and stumbled toward the back, sinking into a seat. Through the window, I saw the man still standing at the stop. He hadn't left. He wasn't pacing or walking away. He was staring, his lips moving in a whisper I couldn't hear. The bus pulled off, carrying me away, but the image stuck. His stare, that frozen expression, like the story wasn't over. That night, sleep didn't come. I replayed everything, each detail sharper in memory than it had been in the moment. The cracked bench, his clenched fists, the emptiness around me. I imagined what might have happened if the bus had been late. I imagined the headlines, the phone call to my parents, the silence in my apartment. By morning, I knew I couldn't just shrug it off. I needed something, anything, to protect myself. Next day I took the train downtown and bought pepper spray. It felt almost silly at first, standing at a counter, handing over money for a little canister that fit in my palm. But when the shopkeeper explained how to hold it, how to press, how to aim, I felt a strange surge of control return. I practiced in my room later, gripping it tight, imagining the hiss, the sting. I prayed I'd never use it, but I promised myself I wouldn't freeze again. Still, fear lingered. Every bus stop felt suspicious now. Every shadow made me tense. I started arriving earlier for shifts so I wouldn't be alone after closing. I took routes that were busier even if they were longer. I told Julieta what had happened. She squeezed my hand, her face pale. "That happens here," she admitted softly. "Too much." I realized then how common my story was. My students mentioned relatives robbed on trains, neighbors attacked in alleys. It wasn't just bad luck. It was the reality of living in a city where desperation walked beside you every day. And yet, life went on. I still taught my classes, still stocked shelves at Walmart, still laughed with my roommates. But under it all, there was a hum of awareness I hadn't carried before. I scanned faces more carefully. I kept my keys in my fist when I walked at night. I thought twice before trusting a stranger's smile. One evening, about a week later, I returned to the same stop. I almost skipped it, almost paid for a taxi, but I forced myself to face it. The street was quiet again. I gripped the pepper spray in my bag. My pulse quickened with every second that passed. No man appeared. No one threatened me. The bus came. I boarded. I rode home. But I realized something then. The fear was no longer about him alone. It was about what he represented. The fragility of safety, the illusion that daylight and routine could protect me. Months passed. I never saw the man again, though sometimes I swore I caught glimpses of him in crowds, a shadow of his stance, the same angle of a jaw. It always vanished when I looked twice. But the memory stayed. It changed the way I carried myself. I started warning new foreign teachers when they arrived. "Stay alert," I told them. "Don't assume daylight means safety. Trust your gut." Some nodded politely. Some laughed it off the way I once had. I didn't push, but I kept telling the story anyway. In classrooms, I taught grammar and vocabulary, but with friends, I taught caution. I think part of me hoped that if I told the story enough, it would lose its grip on me. But even a year later, when I finally traveled south to Patagonia, the bus stops there, quieter, lonelier, made my skin prickle. I learned to live with the fear, to fold it into my routines. It became part of me. Like a scar you stop noticing until you run your fingers over it. Looking back now, years later, I can still feel that Sunday evening in my chest. The cracked bench, the hiss of the bus doors, the stare that followed me as I pulled away. It was one of those small encounters that alters the lens through which you see the world. It didn't ruin Buenos Aires for me. I still remember the colors of San Telmo, the taste of empanadas, the music drifting out of open bars. But it reminded me that beauty and danger can share the same street. That caution isn't paranoia, it's survival. I left Argentina with stories of students, travels, friendships, but I also left with pepper spray tucked in my luggage and a sharper instinct for when a place doesn't feel right. I've trusted that instinct ever since. Never ignore your instincts. The world isn't always dangerous, but it can turn in an instant, and the voice inside you, the tightening gut, the prickling skin, knows more than you think. Caution doesn't make you weak, it makes you prepared, and sometimes preparedness is the only line between an ordinary day and a tragedy. I've been retired for more than a decade now, and most days I keep myself busy with yard work, fishing, or watching my grandkids run wild in the backyard. But every now and then, something pulls me back. A sound, a smell, or a passing place. And whenever I drive past the Walmart on Schroyer Road in Dayton, Ohio, it's like I'm 25 again. Badge still new on my chest, uniform stiff from too many washes. That store was where I learned one of the hardest lessons of my career, a lesson I've carried like a scar ever since. Back in the summer of 1998, I was just a rookie cop, green as they come, eager to prove myself, still believing the job was about chasing robbers and handing out speeding tickets. I thought every call would be clear-cut, good guys and bad guys, victims and perpetrators. But I quickly found out life doesn't fit into neat categories. That Walmart was the heartbeat of the neighborhood. On weekends, the parking lot was a sea of minivans. Kids begged for quarters to play the arcade machines by the front doors, couples argued over grocery lists, and retirees came just to chat with cashiers they'd known for years. The store manager, Evelyn Carter, was a force of nature, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and always in motion. She'd started as a cashier and worked her way up. Employees respected her, even feared her a little because she didn't put up with nonsense. But if you needed someone to fight for you, she was the one. And then there was Barry Thompson. Everyone in that part of Dayton knew Barry. He was in his early 40s, tall but hunched, his shoulders rounded like the weight of the world pressed down on him. His hair was a mess, and he wore that same heavy jacket no matter if it was 90 degrees out. Barry had been diagnosed years earlier with paranoid schizophrenia. He wasn't evil, not in the way people sometimes whispered. He was sick, and he'd fallen through every crack our system had. The first time I met him was on a call to Walmart. Dispatch said he was harassing customers in electronics. I walked in expecting a fight, but instead I found him cornering Evelyn near the televisions, ranting about how the news anchors were sending him coded messages through the screens. Evelyn's jaw was tight, but she wasn't afraid. She just wanted him out before he scared the customers. I spoke to him calmly, tried to keep my voice low. "Barry, why don't we step outside? Let's get some air." To my relief, he listened. We walked out together, and I called his sister, who showed up 20 minutes later in her beat-up sedan. She apologized until her face went red, told me Barry had gone off his meds again and promised she'd handle it. I believed her. At the time, I wanted to believe every problem had someone else responsible, someone else who'd fix it, but it didn't stop there. Over the next few months, Barry became part of my routine. The calls kept coming, always the same location. Sometimes he'd be pacing up and down the aisles, muttering under his breath. Other times he'd block the sliding doors, arms stretched wide like a scarecrow, keeping customers from leaving. Once he followed a teenage boy through half the store, accusing him of being a government spy. I started recognizing the pattern. Barry would go a few weeks doing fine, then he'd spiral. His sister did her best. She was tired, worn down, trying to raise her own kids on top of caring for him. His caseworker showed up every so often, but the whole system was stretched thin. I saw the same story play out with too many families. Evelyn bore the brunt of it. For some reason, Barry fixated on her. He believed she was hiding something. Documents, money, proof of conspiracies. Every time I showed up, she'd be there, standing firm but exhausted. One night, after Barry had been escorted out again, I asked her if she was scared. "Of Barry?" she said, shaking her head. "I don't think he even knows what he's doing half the time. But I'm scared the day will come when talking isn't enough." I didn't know what to say to that. I was young, full of the belief that if I spoke calmly enough, if I showed patience, I could talk anyone down. And sometimes it worked. But I started to notice. Evelyn locking the office doors earlier, glancing over her shoulder more often. Fear has a way of settling into people, like dust that never gets cleaned. I had my doubts too, but I tried to push them away. Each call ended without anyone hurt, and I told myself that was enough. Still, the tension grew every time I saw Barry's jacket at the far end of an aisle. His eyes weren't just tired anymore, they were restless, twitching, desperate. Looking back, maybe I should have pressed harder, demanded more from the mental health services, written stronger reports. But I was just a rookie, still thinking my job ended once the call was over. I was wrong. It was a humid September night, close to 10 o'clock, when everything unraveled. The store was nearly empty, just a few last-minute shoppers and the staff closing down the registers. I happened to be nearby on patrol when the call came over the radio. Disturbance at Walmart. Possible weapon involved. By the time I pulled up, Barry had already stormed through the automatic doors. His jacket was bulging, his eyes wild. I remember the way his voice carried, shouting Evelyn's name. Customers scrambled, carts clattering as people fled. Evelyn was walking a young stock associate through closing duties. She put herself between Barry and the kid without hesitation. "Barry, stop, put that down," she shouted. That's when I saw the knife. Long, thin, pulled from his sleeve. My stomach dropped. I rushed in, weapon drawn. "Barry, drop it now," I commanded. For a split second, he froze. His hand trembled. His lips moved like he wanted to explain something, like part of him was still reachable. I prayed he'd listen. I prayed my voice would be enough. But then he gave a guttural yell and lunged, not at me, but at Evelyn. The next few seconds burned themselves into my memory. The sound of my gunshot echoing through the aisles, the knife clattering onto the tiles, Barry's body collapsing against a display of cereal boxes. Evelyn's scream, the young associate rooted to the ground, unable to move. It was over in an instant, but it didn't feel over at all. Barry died before the paramedics arrived. I sat outside afterward, head in my hands, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to me. My training officer patted my shoulder, told me I'd done what I had to do, that Evelyn was alive because of me. But none of that erased the image of Barry on the ground, his eyes staring up at the ceiling tiles, his lips still trembling like he wanted to speak. For weeks I replayed it in my head. Could I have done something different? Could I have waited? One more second? Tried one more word? My superiors said I'd acted by the book. The review board cleared me. But the book didn't have to live with the echoes of that shot. I did. Evelyn came back to work eventually, but she was never the same. She started carrying pepper spray on her belt, double-checking locks, scanning the parking lot before leaving every night. She still managed her store with strength, but there was a crack in the armor. Trauma leaves, marks you can't always see. The young stock associate quit within a month. He was just a teenager, barely started in life, and that night had burned itself into him. I couldn't blame him. As for me, I carried it into every call I answered after. Every time I heard disturbance, my hand went straight to my holster. Every person in crisis looked like Barry to me, someone teetering between reason and something darker. That's when I began to understand policing wasn't about catching criminals. It was about facing broken systems, broken lives, and knowing sometimes you'd be forced to make choices that felt like losing, no matter what. Years passed. I rose through the ranks, trained younger officers, and eventually retired with a full career behind me. But that night in 1998 never left me. Sometimes I tell the story to recruits, not to scare them, but to give them the truth I wish someone had given me. I tell them policing isn't about heroes and villains. It's about gray areas, about people who are sick, families who are overwhelmed, systems that fail everyone involved, and it's about the split-second decisions that can haunt you for a lifetime. Even now, when I drive past that Walmart, I don't see the busy store it became again. I don't see shoppers hustling with carts or kids tugging on their parents' sleeves. I see Barry, standing with that knife, his jacket heavy on his shoulders. I see Evelyn standing her ground, I see a younger version of myself, gun trembling, in his hand trying to believe he could fix everything with the right words. I couldn't, and that's the hardest part. Tragedy doesn't always come from evil. Sometimes it comes from neglect, from broken systems, from people who need help and don't get it. As officers, as neighbors, as human beings, we have to remember that compassion isn't weakness. The more we ignore those who are struggling, the more likely we are to face them later in moments of crisis. And in those moments, everyone loses. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if my life would have turned out differently if I hadn't taken that job at Walmart. It's funny how decisions that feel small in the moment, just a paycheck, just a way to stay afloat, can come to define so much of what you carry later. In 2006, I was 32 years old and coming off a breakup that had left me gutted. I'd been living in Cincinnati with my girlfriend of 4 years, and we'd been talking about marriage, or at least I thought we were. But she'd grown tired of me drifting from job to job, never quite figuring out what I wanted. One night, we had a blowout fight. Words I wish I could take back, words I can still hear echoing in the kitchen of that little apartment, and by morning, I was packing my life into cardboard boxes. I didn't have family close by, so I drove north to Columbus, figuring a bigger city meant better opportunities. I found a shoebox apartment just off Morse Road. Rent was higher than I liked, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors arguing through the vents. But it was mine. The truth is, I was desperate for work. My savings were thin, and my pride had taken a beating. I wasn't in a position to be picky. When I walked into the Walmart Supercenter down the road, I didn't care what they offered me. The overnight cleaning shift was open, and I took it. People laugh when I tell them I liked cleaning, but there's a rhythm to it I've always found calming. Wiping down counters, pushing a mop across shiny tile, the simple satisfaction of making something dirty into something clean. But cleaning in the dead of night inside a cavernous store isn't like cleaning anywhere else. By 11 p.m. after the year, last customer has rolled out and the day crew has locked up, the place changes. The bright aisles that buzz with chatter in the daytime become cold and hollow. The hum of fluorescent lights fills the silence, and every footstep echoes like it's happening in a warehouse. Most nights I worked alongside others, Trent, my supervisor, and a rotation of part-timers who came and went like revolving doors. But every once in a while the schedule left me alone. I didn't mind at first. Solitude was easier than small talk, and being alone gave me time to think. Some nights I'd replay the breakup in my head, wondering what I should have done differently. Other nights I'd imagine what life would look like if I could start over, really start over. That night in early spring, though, solitude stopped being comforting and turned into something else. Something I can still feel in the pit of my stomach. It was just past midnight when I was wiping down the break room tables. I had my earbuds in, listening to an old playlist on my flip phone. Tom Petty, Springsteen, the kind of music that kept me company. That's when I heard it. A faint clang. At first I thought I imagined it. Maybe a shelf shifting as the building settled. But then it came. Again, sharper this time, followed by the steady thump of footsteps from the stairwell that led down to the storage area. I froze. The building was supposed to be sealed up tight after hours. Only employees with key cards could get in, and there wasn't another name on the schedule besides mine. My first thought was security doing a walkthrough. Sometimes they did, usually letting me know ahead of time. But then I heard it, the metallic squeak of a door opening, then silence. My chest tightened. Something was off. I pulled one earbud out and stepped into the hallway, the mop still in my hand like some makeshift weapon. Peering over the second floor railing, I looked down at the stairwell below. And that's when I saw him. A man stood just inside the entrance. Tall, thin, his head tilted back slightly like he was listening for something. He wasn't wearing a uniform, no vest, no ID, nothing that said he belonged. There, and in his right hand, catching the fluorescent light, was a knife. I ducked back, against the wall, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My brain scrambled for answers. Maybe it was a contractor. Maybe I was overreacting. But the truth was clear. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else in that building, and definitely not a man with a knife. I don't know how long I stood there, pressed against the wall, breathing shallow. A part of me wanted to run for the exit, but to get there, I'd have to pass right by the stairwell. That meant walking straight into him. Instead, I pulled out my old flip phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. My voice came out in a whisper. I'm inside the Walmart on Morse Road. I'm supposed to be the only one here. There's a man with a knife in the stairwell. Please hurry. The dispatcher's voice was calm, measured. She asked me to stay on the line, asked where I was hiding. I told her I was heading into the manager's office. I moved as quietly as I could, every muscle tense, easing the office door shut behind me. I crouched behind the desk, gripping the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to safety. Minutes crawled by like hours. The dispatcher kept me steady, telling me officers were on the way. Then I heard it, the creak of the stairwell door again, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps, climbing higher. He was coming up. My palms were slick with sweat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to steady my breathing. My mind played out every worst-case scenario. What if he pushed into the office? What if the police didn't get there in time? Then, finally, voices. Loud, authoritative. Columbus police, come out now. Relief washed over me, but I stayed frozen until the knock came at the office door. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood there, hands resting near their holsters. They led me out, their flashlights sweeping every corner. For the first time that night, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe stress had gotten to me. But then we checked the cameras. The security team pulled up the CCTV footage, and my stomach turned cold. There he was, clear as day. A tall, thin man in dark clothing slipping through the employee entrance without swiping a badge. He moved like he knew exactly where to go, hugging the walls, avoiding cameras until the last second. The footage caught him standing by the stairwell, knife dangling casually in his hand. And then, this is what chilled me most, he didn't run. He didn't panic. He just slipped back out. The same way he came in, as though he had all the time in the world. He was gone minutes before. The first cruiser rolled up. The officers traded uneasy looks. One muttered, "This guy knew what he was doing." I couldn't stop shaking. The image of him standing there listening, waiting, it burned itself into me. He hadn't come for merchandise. He hadn't grabbed anything, hadn't touched a register. The whole time he seemed to be waiting. Waiting for what, or for who, I didn't know. The officers filed a report, but there wasn't much else to do. No forced entry, no fingerprints. Just a man on tape who shouldn't have been there. They told me to be cautious, to call if I saw anything again. That was it. I went home as the sun came up, sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floor, too wired to sleep. Every creak of my apartment building made me jump. I replayed the sound of his footsteps, the way his head tilted like he was listening for me. The thought that gnawed at me most was simple. If I hadn't ducked away fast enough, if I hadn't hidden in that office, would he have found me? Lasted 2 more weeks on that job. Each shift I felt eyes on me, even when the aisles were empty. Every clang of a mop bucket, every squeak of the ceiling vents sent my nerves into overdrive. I told Trent I was done. He tried to talk me out of it, said incidents like that were rare, but rare didn't matter. Rare was enough. I handed in my badge and my keys and I walked away. Life moved on. I found other work, warehouse jobs, delivery routes, anything that let me stay around people instead of being isolated in the dead of night. On paper, I kept living. But in quiet moments, especially when the house is dark and the neighborhood still, I think about him. That man in the stairwell. He wasn't desperate, wasn't frantic. He was calm, methodical. Like he knew exactly how much time he had, exactly where to go and exactly when to leave. And the worst part? I never learned who he was or what he wanted. Some nights when sleep won't come, I picture him standing outside my apartment door, waiting, listening, knife dangling at his side, and I wonder, did I cross paths with him by accident or was he there for me all along? When I think back on that summer in Pullman, Washington, I can almost convince myself it was ordinary. A quiet college town with rolling hills, empty streets when students left for break, and sunsets that painted the wheat fields gold. From a distance it looked safe, even comforting, but I know better. That summer taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. It slips into the edges of your life, where you least expect it. I was 21, a psychology major trying to save money for the fall semester. Jobs were slim in Pullman when half the student population went home, but the Walmart on Bridge Street was always hiring. I landed a part-time spot in the bakery, which sounded better than running a register or stocking shelves. The work was steady, if not glamorous. I filled trays with muffins, stacked boxes of donuts, and arranged cookies behind glass cases for customers who wandered in late at night. I didn't mind the monotony. It gave me time to think about my classes, about what I wanted after graduation. Growing up in Seattle, I'd been used to anonymity, the blur of city life, strangers who never made eye contact. Pullman was different, smaller, intimate. Everyone noticed everyone else. That was both a blessing and a curse. Because when a stranger showed up, lingering too long, you couldn't help but notice. The night I met him started like any other. It was July, hot and sticky even after the sun went down. I was restocking a tray of pastries when I heard footsteps behind me. I looked up and saw a man, mid-40s, stringy ponytail, greasy hair pulled back, a faint smell of cigarettes that drifted across the counter. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in days. He hovered silently, watching me arrange croissants until he blurted out, "You ever make chili?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. Sometimes. You gotta add vinegar at the end, he said, nodding as though it were a sacred secret. Brings out the flavor. Most people don't know that. I forced a polite smile. I'll keep that in mind. I tried to move on with my work, but he followed me, rattling off more cooking tips like a broken faucet. Then, without warning, he leaned closer and said, "You should come by my place sometime. I make homemade hot sauce, best in town." My stomach twisted. "I'm busy with school," I lied. His voice dropped lower. "I insist. It's important." Before I could answer, another customer, a woman in her 60s, stepped forward. She placed herself between us, looking me straight in the eyes. "Miss, can you help me find the lemon tarts?" Her tone left no room for argument. The man muttered under his breath, retreating a few steps. I nodded quickly, grateful, and busied myself with the woman's request. But the unease lingered long after he walked away. I should have known that was just the beginning. When my shift ended, I thought I'd seen the last of him. I clocked out, untied my apron, and walked toward the registers. But there he was again, standing near the exit, eyes fixed on me, like he'd been waiting. He stepped forward, holding out a flimsy business card. Red Flame Enterprises, it read, printed in cheap ink. No phone number, no address, just the name. I took it because refusing felt dangerous. I shoved it into my apron pocket, nodded awkwardly, and walked out as fast as I could. The night air felt heavy. I made my way to the bus stop, clutching my bag, replaying the encounter in my head. I told myself he'd leave, that he was just eccentric. But then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. He was following, a few paces back. "We could share a cab," he said casually, his smile too wide. My throat tightened. "I'm fine." Just then, headlights appeared. I waved frantically at the first cab, nearly stumbling as I climbed inside. I gave the driver my address, my hands trembling as I pulled the door shut. The driver glanced in the mirror. "You okay, miss?" Yeah, I whispered, though my heart was still hammering. I thought that was the end of it, but later that night, standing by my apartment window, I saw a car parked across the street. Headlights off, engine quiet. My chest froze when I recognized the dented sedan. He was waiting. I called campus police. They sent a cruiser, circled the block. By the time they arrived, the car was gone. One officer shrugged. Could be nothing. Just keep your doors locked. Could be nothing. I tried to believe him, but deep down, I knew better. For a while, nothing happened. I convinced myself maybe I'd overreacted. The car never came back, or at least I didn't see it. I buried myself in summer classes, telling myself that's what mattered. But paranoia doesn't fade easily. I jumped at every noise in the hallway. I taped my blinds shut, so no one could see inside. When I walked home from campus, I carried my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over 911. 2 weeks later, my fears proved right. It was late, almost midnight, when I came home after studying with friends. My apartment door was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I pushed it open, every muscle tight. Inside, drawers had been pulled open, clothes strewn across the floor. My laptop was gone, a few electronics missing. At first, I thought it was a random burglary, but then I noticed something else. A small framed photo of me and my younger brother, taken at the Seattle waterfront 2 summers earlier, was missing from my nightstand. Nothing else personal had been touched. Burglars don't steal photographs. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever had been here wasn't after money. They wanted something else, something personal. The police came, wrote a report, and promised to look into it. One officer said, probably just some junkie after quick cash. But I knew better. A junkie doesn't take only one picture. I spent that night huddled on my couch, lights on, phone clutched in my hand. Every sound outside made me flinch. I realized with a sinking dread that I wasn't safe in my own home. The weeks after the break-in blurred together. I went through the motions, classes, assignments, grocery runs, but I was never really present. My mind was always scanning, calculating, bracing. Sometimes I thought I saw him again. In the Walmart parking lot, standing too still among the cars. On the sidewalk near campus, his greasy ponytail catching the light. I could never be sure. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was real. I quit my bakery shifts. I told my manager I was too busy with school. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bring myself to walk through those automatic doors again. The aisles where he first spoke to me felt poisoned. I started sleeping at a friend's place a few nights a week. She thought I was being dramatic, but she let me crash on her couch anyway. "You've got to stop watching crime shows," she teased once. I laughed, but inside I wanted to scream. She hadn't seen his eyes. She hadn't felt the weight of his presence. Everywhere I went, I felt hunted. I finished that semester, but I was never the same. When people asked why I quit Walmart, I gave them half-truths. It was boring, I'd say, or the hours were bad. I never told them about the man with the card, the car outside my window, or the missing photograph. Even now, years later, I sometimes tell the story to close friends. My voice always lowers at the end. I don't want to scare them, but I want them to understand, because here's the truth: he didn't want money. He didn't want pastries or electronics. He wanted me to know he could reach me whenever he chose. That's what kept me up at night, staring at the ceiling, waiting for footsteps outside my door. That summer changed the way I look at people. Strangers aren't just strangers anymore, they're potential threats. Pullman still looks quaint on postcards, safe and small, but I know what lurks beneath the surface, and I'll never forget it. Safety is never guaranteed, even in quiet towns that look harmless on the outside. Danger doesn't always scream. It whispers, follows, lingers. The lesson I carry is simple. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to ignore your fear, it's to act on it before it's too late. When I think about that night in Waco, I still can't decide if it was a close call or a warning I was never meant to fully understand. I've worked cleaning jobs most of my adult life. Nothing glamorous, nothing people write about, but steady work. You show up, mop floors, empty trash, wipe down shelves, clock out, and go home. It's not the kind of work that usually leaves scars. I started out young, pushing a broom in mom-and-pop diners and gas stations. Over the years, I moved up to bigger contracts, hospitals, schools, and eventually the giant retail stores. By 2022, I'd been with the same regional cleaning contractor for nearly a decade. My crew rotated between stores all over Texas. Walmart supercenters, Targets, grocery chains. We worked nights when the doors locked and the customers were gone. People think being in a Walmart after hours would be peaceful. Empty aisles, the low hum of fluorescent lights, no customers asking for directions. Sometimes it was, but there's another side to it. Those stores are huge, like aircraft hangars with shelves. When you're alone in there, the silence can feel crushing. Every sound echoes. Every shadow looks wrong. I used to tell new hires, don't let the quiet mess with your head. But I'll admit, sometimes it messed with mine. That summer, my rotation brought me back to the Walmart off North Loop 340 in Waco. I'd been there plenty of times before. It was one of the bigger locations, the kind that feels like a town by itself. I knew the night manager, knew where they kept the supplies, knew how long it took to get through each section. Nothing about it should have been unusual. But the night I started that shift, June, hot and sticky, close to midnight, things felt off from the beginning. I signed in with the manager, grabbed my supplies, and stepped out back for my usual cigarette before getting started. It was my ritual. One smoke before the long haul. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few employee cars clustered near the doors. But then I saw it. A white utility van parked way out by the far end, where the cameras didn't reach. No markings, no company logo, just dented panels and no windows on the back. The front seats looked empty. I frowned, thinking maybe it belonged to another contractor or someone sleeping rough. Then it rocked. Just slightly, like someone moved, inside. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but there wasn't any. The air was heavy that night, still and muggy. I squinted, pulled out my phone, and flicked on the flashlight, aiming the beam toward the van. Instantly, the rocking stopped. The stillness felt deliberate, like whoever was inside had frozen. The second they knew I was watching, a chill ran down my spine. I'm not the jumpy type. I've worked in plenty of empty buildings where raccoons and stray dogs got inside. But this was different. Something about that stillness made my gut tighten. I stubbed out my cigarette and hurried back inside. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a contractor's van, maybe the shift change had someone napping in the back. But the image stuck with me. By 12:15 a.m., I was upstairs in the office area, scrubbing down desks. That's when I heard it. A crash, loud and sharp, echoing from downstairs. I froze, mop in hand. Then came muffled voices. I crouched low, heart pounding, straining to hear. Footsteps followed, heavy, confident. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. My whisper barely came out. This is Jason Miller. I'm inside the Walmart on North Loop 340. The store's supposed to be locked, but I think someone broke in. Please send help. As I spoke, the footsteps grew louder. Then a voice, deep, steady. Upstairs. Check there. My blood ran cold. I dropped behind a desk, pressing the phone to my ear. Through the gap between the wall and the chair, I saw him. A tall man, muscular, moving with the kind of ease that told me he wasn't new to this. In his hand was a pistol, resting like it belonged there. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't rushing. He was hunting. Another voice called from below. Nobody. Up there. Let's move. The gunman smirked. He tilted his head, scanning the offices. His eyes lingered close to where I crouched, close enough that I felt sure he could hear my breathing. Then, after a beat that felt like forever, he turned and walked away. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I stayed frozen until the sound of a door slamming echoed below. Then, salvation. Red and blue lights flashed through the front windows. Police shouting, boots pounding. The dispatcher told me to stay put until officers found me. When they did, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. We swept the store together, aisle by aisle. Nothing. No broken doors, no pried locks. The place looked untouched. But when they checked the lot, the white van was gone. Later in the security office, the footage told the story I'd only glimpsed. 2 men had entered through the delivery bay. Someone had left it unsecured. The grainy black and white feed, you could see them slipping in, one with a crowbar, the other with the pistol. They searched, moved methodically, signaling to each other. And then, just 5 minutes before the first cruiser arrived, they walked calmly back out. No panic, no rush. Like they'd planned it all along. The officers exchanged looks. One muttered, "These guys knew exactly what they were doing." I just sat there replaying the sight of that pistol, the smirk on the man's face, the way the van had gone still when I shined my light. I told the officers what I saw. They filed their reports, took statements, and told me to take the night. There wasn't much else to do. But there was one detail I didn't share. When I first shined my light on that van, before it went still, I thought I saw shapes in the back. Not the tall outlines of men, but smaller, lower, like children, hunched and motionless. The thought lodged in my mind and wouldn't let go. I never went back to that Walmart again. My company offered me shifts at other stores and I took them, but the memory followed me everywhere. At night I jolted awake, heart racing, replaying the sound of that man's voice. Upstairs, check, there. I'd see the smirk, the pistol, the frozen van. And always, in the darkest hours, I'd see those faint shapes in the back, too short to be grown men. I never told the police about that part. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was boxes or shadows or my imagination. But the silence that followed when I shined the light, that was real. And the knowledge that they slipped in and out so easily, armed and calm, that was real too. Sometimes, I wonder what they were looking for. Sometimes I wonder what was in the back of that van. And sometimes when I drive past Waco, I keep my eyes on the far end of every parking lot, scanning for dented white vans. When I think back to the summer of 2004, I can still feel the heat of that dry New Mexico sun beating down on the parking lot asphalt, warping the air into shimmers that made everything look like it was melting. I was 18, restless and counting the weeks until I'd leave for college. My parents owned a small convenience store off the highway, and they weren't the kind of people who believed in free summers. They told me if I wanted spending money for school, I had to earn it. So I applied at the Walmart on Highway 60, the biggest store in town and, truth be told, the center of our little community. If you grew up in a place like ours, you know what I mean. Walmart wasn't just a store, it was the meeting ground, the hangout spot, the place where everyone ended up sooner or later. Farmers came in to buy seed and tools. Moms wandered the aisles for bargains. Teenagers like me hung around the arcade, machines pretending not to be bored. The place was like a clock that kept the rhythm of the town. I got hired as a bagger and stock boy. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. And the air conditioning inside the store was worth more than gold when you'd been sweating in the desert heat all day. Most nights were long and uneventful, mopping floors, restocking shelves, listening to the buzz of fluorescent lights until my eyes ached. The work was dull, but dull felt safe. I liked blending in, staying quiet. I wasn't the kid cracking jokes with customers or charming the managers. I kept my head down, worked, and went. Home smelling like floor wax and fried food from the in-store Subway. That was fine by me. But everything changed one July evening, and the memory of that night still shakes me when I least expect it. It was late, About 9:15 p.m., and I was up front helping bag groceries for the last few customers. The store was winding down, half empty, music on the intercom fading softer than usual. I was already thinking about clocking out and driving home, maybe sitting on the porch with a cold drink. Then the doors slid open with their familiar whoosh, and a man walked in. He looked out of place right away. His hair was greasy. His shirt, wrinkled like he'd slept in it for days, and his eyes were wild, darting around the store as though he was looking for something invisible. His hands shook when he shoved them into the front pocket of his hoodie. At first I figured he was just another drifter. We got plenty of those, folks passing through on the highway, tired and worn down. But there was something about the way he moved that froze me in place. It was the way he seemed to carry tension like a storm cloud, the kind that breaks without warning. And then it did. Before I could even make sense of what was happening, he pulled a kitchen knife from under his hoodie and vaulted over the customer service counter. He landed so hard a rack of candy bars toppled to the floor. My breath caught in my throat. "Open the drawer!" he shouted, his voice cracking in desperation. "Now!" The cashier froze, too terrified to move. Customers screamed and ducked behind aisles. I couldn't move either, rooted to the floor with my heart hammering in my chest. That moment, the sight of the knife glinting under the store lights is burned into me forever. The robber's voice echoed through the store, sharp and frantic, bouncing off the wide aisles like it was amplified. "I said open it!" he screamed again, his face flushed with anger and panic. The cashier, a girl not much older than me, shook so badly her hands couldn't find the register key. She stammered, tears filling her eyes, but no sound came out. Wanted to yell, to move, to do something, but I was frozen. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. Not here. Not now. And then the chaos shifted in an instant. Two men who had been sitting in the Subway cafe at the edge of the store suddenly stood up. I knew them by sight. Older ranch hands, the type who came in nearly every evening to sip coffee and watch people. Quiet men, toughened by years in the sun, their boots worn down from long days in the dirt. I never even knew their names. Before the robber could make another move, one of them rushed forward and tackled him from behind. The other grabbed a chair and swung it, knocking the knife loose. It clattered across the tile and slid under the counter. The sound of the scuffle was brutal. Fists pounding, the robber's body slamming against the floor, curses flying from his mouth. He fought like a cornered animal, thrashing, biting, scratching. The older men were merciless, fueled by adrenaline and maybe something deeper: anger, fear, instinct. One of them took a punch to the jaw but didn't flinch. The other shoved his knee into the robber's chest, pinning him down. "Stop!" I finally found my voice. "You'll kill him!" I scrambled forward, my hands shaking as I tried to pull one of them back. The robber's face was already bloodied, swelling under their fists. Customers peeked around corners, horrified, but no one else dared to step in. For a moment, I wasn't sure who the real danger was, the robber or the men beating him. Someone must have called the police because within minutes, sirens wailed outside. The flashing red and blue lights flooded through the front windows as officers stormed in. They pried the men off the robber, who lay sprawled and groaning, barely conscious. Blood smeared across the tiles, and the smell of sweat and fear hung heavy in the air. The ranchers stepped back, panting, their knuckles raw, their faces tight with something I couldn't read. Maybe pride, maybe regret, maybe both. The officers cuffed the robber, pulled him to his feet, and hauled him out of the store. The crowd slowly gathered, still shaken. The cashier was sobbing quietly, a manager trying to calm her. Kids clung to their parents, eyes wide with fear. I just stood there, unable to move. My stomach churned, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The knife lay abandoned under the counter until an officer picked it up with a gloved hand. When it was over, when the sirens faded and the robber was gone, the store felt hollow, like something had cracked inside it, something that couldn't be put back the same. I kept seeing the man's eyes, wide and desperate, and the fists raining down on him. It was the first time I truly realized how fast life could turn. How, one moment you're bagging groceries and the next you're staring into the wild eyes of someone who might kill for a handful of bills. That night, when I finally clocked out, I drove home in silence. My hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The highway stretched ahead, empty except for the occasional truck roaring past, its headlights slicing the dark. When I pulled into our driveway, the familiar glow of the porch light should have comforted me, but instead I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house, replaying every second of the robbery in my head. The sound of fists hitting flesh echoed in my ears. The glint of the knife flashed behind my eyes. Inside, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table. Mom looked up from the newspaper and smiled. "You're late. Busy night?" I swallowed. Yeah, some trouble at the store." "What kind of trouble?" Dad asked, his brows furrowing. I shook my head. "Nothing major. Just some guy caused a scene. Police handled it." I forced a smile, hoping they wouldn't see through me. I didn't want to worry them. Didn't want to admit how close it had been. They nodded, accepting the lie, and went back to their quiet evening. I slipped out onto the porch with a cheap beer I'd stashed in the fridge. I wasn't supposed to drink. It was still technically illegal at 18, but I didn't care. I needed something to steady my nerves. The desert night was still and silent. Crickets chirped in the distance and a warm breeze stirred the dry air. I sat there for hours, sipping slowly, staring at the stars until they blurred. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Over the next few days, life at the Walmart tried to return to normal, but nothing felt the same. The cashier who'd been held at knife point quit. The ranchers came in less often, and when they did, people whispered about them, some calling them heroes, others saying they'd gone too far. As for me, I felt stuck in the middle, grateful they'd stopped the man, but haunted by how close they'd come to killing him. Haunted by the look in his eyes when he realized he was trapped. And beneath it all, one thought kept nagging at me. What if no one had stepped in? What if it had been just me, the cashier, and the knife? That question followed me into my dreams, where the robber's shadow loomed and I froze, again and again, unable to act. As summer dragged on, I tried to bury the memory under routine. I stocked shelves, bagged groceries, mopped floors, but every time the automatic doors whooshed open, I flinched. Every time a customer shoved their hands into a hoodie pocket, my pulse quickened. One night, about a week after the robbery, one of the ranchers, his name turned out to be Hank, stopped by my register. His jaw was still bruised from the scuffle. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice rough like gravel. I shook my head. "I didn't do anything." He looked me straight in the eye. "You kept it from going too far. That matters." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and he walked off, boots clacking against the tile. Later, when I was bagging groceries for an older woman, she leaned close and whispered, "Those men were heroes. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But not everyone agreed. At the Subway cafe, I overheard two guys arguing. "They damn near killed that man," one said. "Should have let the cops handle it." "You saying you'd rather he stabbed someone?" the other shot back. I pretended not to listen, but the words clung to me. The whole town was split. Was it justice or was it brutality? And me? I wasn't sure anymore. By the time fall rolled around, my bags were packed for college. I should have been excited, ready to leave that little town behind. But the night at Walmart lingered in my mind, stubborn and heavy. On my last shift, I walked through the aisles one more time. Kids played at the arcade, farmers talked in the garden section, families shopped, like nothing bad had ever happened. But I knew better. I knew how quickly it could all unravel. When I clocked out, I looked around the store, trying to burn the sight of it into my memory. Ordinary, safe, Familiar, but fragile. So fragile. I didn't tell anyone goodbye. I just drove home, loaded my things, and the next morning I left for college. I never worked another shift at that Walmart, and when I came home for breaks, I avoided it as much as I could. Because every time I walked through those doors, I saw the knife. I heard the screams. I felt the weight of how thin the line is between an ordinary day and a nightmare. I was 22 the year I thought I finally had my life on some kind of track. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I was working evenings as a cashier at the Walmart on South Kings Highway in St. Louis, and between that and splitting rent with my roommate, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was starting to get ahead. Most of my friends from high school had already moved away or dropped into routines I barely recognized. A couple got married, a couple ended up back living with their parents, some disappeared into jobs that barely paid the bills. I wanted to believe I was different. I was paying off my student loans slowly, keeping a roof over my head and trying to convince myself that working under fluorescent lights for 8 hours a day was temporary. My mom hated the idea of me living in the city. Every phone call ended the same way. Claire, don't stay out late. Don't trust strangers. Be smart. I'd laugh it off, but her words stuck. My roommate Hannah usually picked me up after work. She drove this beat-up old Saturn that rattled every time she shifted gears, but I didn't complain. It saved me from the bus. I hated buses. Too many drunks, too many creeps, too many people who stared too long or pressed too close. But that night in March 2018, Hannah texted me 10 minutes before closing. Car's dead. Starter shot. Sorry. You're on your own. So I clocked out, stuffed my groceries into a reusable Walmart bag, and pulled my jacket tight. The air outside had that late winter bite, the kind that makes your eyes water. I checked the time, 9:02 p.m. The next bus was due in 6 minutes. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Just one ride, 20 minutes tops, and I'd be home. The number 30 bus groaned to a stop, its headlights washing over cracked sidewalks and boarded-up shops. I climbed on, fed my crumpled bills into the machine, and scanned the half-empty rows. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like a wasp stuck in a jar. The driver didn't even glance at me. I sat near the middle, clutching my bag. The smell of sweat, diesel, and something sour hung heavy in the air. A teenager in headphones sprawled across 2 seats, bobbing his head to music only he could hear. A man in a hoodie had his hood pulled low, pretending to sleep. A couple argued in hushed tones near the front. I pulled out my phone but couldn't focus on the screen. My mom's warning echoed in my head. Halfway through the ride, the bus stopped by an abandoned gas station. The door hissed open, and an elderly woman climbed aboard, leaning hard on her cane. She wore a faded coat that looked 2 sizes too big, her thin frame swallowed inside it. Her eyes darted nervously down the aisle, searching for a seat. No one moved. The teenagers stared at their phones. The man in the hoodie kept sleeping. Even the arguing couple turned away. Something twisted in my stomach. I stood. "Here, ma'am," I said, smiling. "You can take mine." Her tired eyes softened. "Thank you, dear. Not many polite ones left these days." I sat back down, a row behind her, feeling a little proud of myself. For a second, the bus didn't feel so heavy, so dark, but that warmth evaporated as soon as I noticed him. At the very back sat a tall man in a white tank top, tattoos crawling up both arms. He had been staring at me since I boarded. His glare wasn't casual. It was fixed, deliberate, like he was waiting for something. His jaw worked back and forth as if he were chewing invisible words. I looked away quickly, telling myself not to overthink it, but I could feel his eyes burning holes in the back of my head. The bus rattled on, brakes screeching. At each stop, people got on, people got off, but he stayed. Every time I glanced back, he was still watching me. I tried distracting myself, scrolled through my messages, checked the time, stared out the window at the blur of dim streetlights. But when you Know someone's eyes are locked on you, it doesn't matter what you do, you feel it. The bus slowed again. My stomach flipped. We were still 5 stops from mine. I told myself he'd probably get off soon, but when the doors opened, he stood suddenly and stormed down the aisle. Before I understood what was happening, his hand shot out and clamped around my wrist. His skin was hot, rough, his grip iron. "You get off with me, now." The words were low, commanding, like he expected me to obey without question. My pulse spiked. "Let go of me." I yanked back, but his grip only tightened. He dragged me toward the open doors, my sneakers squeaking against the dirty floor. Panic clawed up my throat. I grabbed the nearest pole with my free hand, knuckles white, holding on, like my life depended on it. The old woman gasped. The teenagers buried their faces deeper in their phones. The hooded man didn't move. The driver stared straight ahead, hands frozen on the wheel. "This can't be happening," my mind screamed. "Not here, not with all these people watching." He tugged harder, yanking me toward the steps. "Stop fighting, girl. Don't make me..." Before he could finish, another set of hands grabbed me from behind. A man in a baseball cap, maybe mid-30s, wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled with everything he had. The force broke the attacker's grip. I stumbled backward, crashing into the stranger's chest, gasping for air. The man in the tank top cursed, glaring at both of us. Then, without another word, he bolted out the doors. The bus lurched forward, leaving him standing on the curb under a flickering streetlight. My knees trembled. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. The stranger steadied me, his voice low but firm. "You can't be riding this route alone at night. This neighborhood. People disappear here." I opened my mouth to say thank you, to ask his name, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my chest tight. By the time I turned, he had already let go and moved back to his seat. He stared out the window as if nothing had happened. The rest of the ride passed in silence. I sat frozen, clutching my bag like a shield. Every bump in the road made me jump. I kept expecting the bus to stop and the man in the tank top to come back, maybe with friends. But he didn't. The bus rattled on, passengers pretending nothing had happened. Nobody looked at me. Nobody spoke. Even the old woman avoided my eyes, guilt written all over her face. When we finally pulled up to my stop, my legs felt like they might give out. I forced myself to stand, wobbling toward the door. The stranger in the cap didn't move. He didn't look at me. It was like he had stepped out of nowhere, saved me, and then disappeared back into it. I stumbled off the bus, the cold air slapping me awake. My street was dim, most of the houses with lights off, shadows stretching long across cracked sidewalks. Every sound made me flinch. The crunch of leaves, the hum of a distant car, my own footsteps echoing too loud. I hurried home, heart still hammering. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door, then locked it again. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing hard, staring at the door as if it might burst open. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the TV on low, my phone glowing in my hands. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? A man tried to drag me off a bus, but he ran away. They'd file a report, maybe shrug, maybe tell me to be careful. So, I just sat there replaying it over and over in my head. The hand on my wrist, the look in his eyes, the silence of the other passengers, and the stranger who saved me. The next morning, my body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying bricks in my chest all night. At work, I went through the motions, scanning items, bagging groceries, forcing a smile, but inside, I was still on that bus. Every time the automatic doors slid open, I flinched, half expecting to see that white tank top. Angela, one of the older cashiers, pulled me aside during lunch. "You okay, Claire? You look pale." I opened my mouth, then shut it. What was I supposed to say? That a man tried to drag me off a bus while a dozen people watched? That I'd been saved by someone whose name I never learned? Instead, I just nodded. Didn't sleep much. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger, the way he'd pulled me back without hesitation. The way his voice had been calm but firm, and the way he vanished into silence like it was nothing. I pulled up a local forum online and typed out a post. To the man in the baseball cap on the 30 bus last night, yeah, you saved me. I don't know how to thank you. Please, if you see this, reach out. I hit post and stared at the screen, waiting for a reply that never came. Days passed, then weeks. The thread sank lower and lower until it disappeared. He never responded, but I couldn't let go. Every time I rode the bus, I found myself scanning the seats, hoping to see him again. Months later, I was still haunted. Every time I passed that stretch of road, I stared out the window, half expecting to see the man in the tank top waiting. By the curb, watching, patient. I never did, but the fear stayed. Sometimes I thought about the other passengers, the ones who sat frozen, who did nothing. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I felt numb. Fear does strange things to people. It makes them small, it makes them look away. I understood even if I didn't forgive. Other times I thought about the stranger. Why had he helped when nobody else would? Why had he said nothing afterward? Maybe he was just passing through, another face in the city. Maybe he didn't want thanks, maybe he didn't even think what he did was special. But to me, it was everything. I never saw him again, but I carry him with me, like a reminder that not everyone turns away, that sometimes help comes when you least expect it. Still, I can't shake the fear. I double-check the locks every night. I walk faster when I hear footsteps behind me. I avoid buses whenever I can. That night didn't break me, but it changed me. Safety isn't something you can take for granted. It can vanish in a second, in the grip of a stranger's hand. But courage can appear just as suddenly, in someone else, in you, in the decision to stand up when no one else does. If that stranger hadn't acted, I don't know what would have happened. And if I'd stayed silent afterward, I would have let fear win completely. The truth is, we all have a choice, to look away or to step in, to pretend it's not happening or to be the hand that pulls someone back. That night on the bus taught me the value of both fear and kindness. And I hope, if I ever find myself in the stranger's shoes, I'll choose to be the one who acts. I've worked nights at Walmart for most of my adult life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And for someone like me, a single mother trying to hold life together, it was enough. I started as a cashier when my son, Tyler, was just a toddler, and I remember how those long hours helped me feel like I was making something of myself. Over the years, I moved through different roles, stocking overnight, leading small teams, and eventually taking on the position of night manager. By the time I was 32, I'd settled into a rhythm, a predictable schedule that let me juggle work, parenting, and the quiet moments I clung to when the store's fluorescent lights dimmed and the aisles emptied. Our Walmart sat just outside Jackson, Mississippi on Highway 80, a store most people drove past without a second thought. For the locals, though, it was the center of everything. Families shopped there weekly. Teenagers hung around the arcade or wandering through the DVD section, and older folks stopped by for a chat in the garden section. By the time my shift started, at 10 p.m., the store was usually quiet, humming with the clatter of stocking carts and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. I liked that. The calm felt safer than the chaos of the day. I remember the first time I noticed him. Gary. I didn't know his name then. I just saw a man lingering near electronics. Brows furrowed, his hands tucked into a worn hoodie. Something about him made me uneasy. At first it was subtle. He browsed DVDs, occasionally glanced my way, muttered about discounts. I assumed he was just another night shopper who didn't realize how late it was. But it didn't take long to notice a pattern. He came back, and then again, always late, always when the aisles were nearly empty, and always, somehow, when I was alone. At first, he asked simple questions. Do you like this movie? It's quiet tonight, isn't it? Polite small talk. I answered, keeping my distance, but I remember how his eyes lingered longer than necessary, following me as I moved between aisles, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Weeks passed, and he started timing his visits to match the end of my shift. He offered to walk me to my car despite my firm refusals. He parked near the lot, pretending to smoke, but always watching, waiting. One night, I turned down a side street, and his headlights were there trailing me, stopping only when I reached my apartment complex. Fear crept in quietly, then steadily, making me check every aisle, rehearse excuses for escape, and double-check the locks in my apartment when I got home. The feeling of being watched became a weight I carried everywhere. I told the night associates to stay nearby, but Gary had a way of appearing where I least expected. I filed a police report after one particularly nerve-wracking night, but the officers told me there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't made a direct threat. Walmart security tried to help, escorting me out occasionally, but he always found another corner, another moment to appear. It wasn't violent yet, but it was relentless. By October, the tension had escalated. Gary's friendly questions turned personal. "Do you live around here? Does your son live with you?" My polite deflections weren't enough to dissuade him. He lingered in the lot after my shift, leaning casually against his truck, pretending to check his phone while clearly watching the doors. Every time I drove home, I scanned the streets, unsure if I was being followed. My nerves frayed. I stopped, going out at night except when I had to. I double-checked locks, kept blinds drawn, and even slept with the phone beside my bed, ready to call 911 at a moment's notice. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I found him again near the electronics aisle, crouched slightly as if examining something. He smiled at me. I forced a polite smile back. "Long night?" I asked. "Just passing through," he said, voice casual, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "You work late, huh?" "Yes," I said carefully. "Night manager." His nod was slow, deliberate. I like that. Responsibility. The compliment sent a chill down my spine. He sounded harmless, almost admiring, but the way he lingered, the way he seemed to know exactly when I'd be alone, made my stomach knot. Over the next weeks, I caught glimpses of him in the lot after my shifts, sometimes standing by a light post, sometimes crouched near his truck. Once, I spotted his headlights following me, along the two-lane road to my apartment. Each sighting tightened my chest, made my hands tremble as I fumbled for keys. The fear wasn't just for me, it was for Tyler too. I couldn't risk him seeing me panicked or unsafe. I started rehearsing conversations in my head. What if he cornered me? What if he tried to force a ride? I imagined calling for help, dialing the police, yelling, but each scenario ended with him, smiling calmly, unthreatening, yet impossible to ignore. It was the not knowing that haunted me, the waiting, the watching, the uncertainty of what he might do next. One winter morning, after a grueling overnight shift, I arrived at Walmart to find the lot filled with police cars. Gary's truck was parked near the far end, crooked and still. My heart sank. The news hit me before anyone could explain. He had taken his own life inside that vehicle during the night. Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with sorrow. I hadn't wished him harm. I only wanted him to leave me alone, to stop watching, to stop following. And yet the thought that he had reached a point where ending his life seemed like a solution was overwhelming. I tried to process it, but every memory came rushing back. The nights he lingered, the intensity in his eyes, the strange mix of desperation and calm. In the weeks after, I avoided the lot when I could, though I still had to go to work. I caught myself staring at corners where he used to linger, expecting shadows to shift, expecting movement that never came. Tyler noticed my distraction one evening. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing, baby," I said, brushing his hair back. "Just tired." But I wasn't just tired. I was exhausted from months of fear, from constant vigilance, from the strain of wondering if a stranger was following me every time I left the store. Over time, life returned to a semblance of normal. The officers who had responded that morning continued, occasional patrols near the lot. Walmart security was more vigilant. I could walk to my car without scanning for shadows or worrying about headlights in the distance. But the memory lingered. It lingered in quiet moments when the store hummed with emptiness, when I caught a customer's gaze a little too long, when I opened the door to my apartment late at night. I realized something important. Danger doesn't always announce itself with threats or violence. Sometimes, it creeps in quietly, settles in the spaces you think are safe, and doesn't leave until something irreparable happens. I'd spent months in constant tension, fearful, replaying. Interactions in my head, imagining the worst outcomes. And yet, nothing violent had occurred until the tragedy of his own choice. The experience reshaped my perception of safety. I became more cautious, yes, but also more aware of the weight of human fragility. Gary's obsession, though frightening, wasn't a story of malice. It was a story of desperation, of a life unraveling in a way I could never fully understand. Grenoble. Later, I still drive past that Walmart lot at night. Even though I'm safe, even though Tyler is grown and independent, I can picture the shape of a man leaning against a post, half hidden in shadow, watching the doors. I remember how small, quiet, and ordinary moments can shift into fear so suddenly, so completely. I remember how long it took to feel comfortable again. I never blamed him for what happened. In some ways, I felt sorrow for him. He was a man, carrying invisible burdens, trying to cope in a way that ultimately failed him. The experience taught me to appreciate the ordinary, the safe, the quiet nights that now feel like a gift. I learned that safety is fragile, that fear can live in spaces you thought were secure, and that people's struggles are often hidden, silent, and incomprehensible. I learned that courage isn't always about confronting danger. It's about navigating it with awareness, protecting yourself, and understanding the complexities of human behavior. Life is unpredictable, and danger doesn't always arrive with violence or alarms. Sometimes it lurks quietly, testing patience, awareness, and resilience. True courage is not just standing up to threats, it's recognizing fragility, setting boundaries, and navigating fear with clarity and compassion. Every life carries unseen burdens and understanding that helps us survive, adapt, and grow without losing sight of our humanity. I grew up in a modest working-class neighborhood in Greenville, South Carolina, where hard work was more than a value. It was a way of life. My parents ran a small auto shop, and from a young age, I learned that responsibility wasn't optional. You either did the work or it didn't get done. I carried that lesson with me through school, college, and eventually into my first management role at the Walmart neighborhood market on Elm Street. I was 24 and freshly out of college, full of optimism and nerves. The title of day manager sounded impressive on paper, but the reality was a mixture of mundane tasks and quiet pressure. I oversaw inventory, supervised associates, and ensured the store ran smoothly. Most days, it was routine, checking shelves, reconciling the cash drawers, making sure the employees were on schedule. I liked routine. I liked knowing what to expect. It made me feel capable, like I could handle the responsibility of more than just myself. That November was colder than usual, rain falling in sheets that hammered the parking lot, turning the asphalt into a mirror of the dim streetlights. I remember arriving that evening, umbrella in hand, feeling the chill seep through my coat as I unlocked the front doors. The night crew had gone home early, leaving me alone with 2 junior associates who were stocking the back aisles. The storm outside made the fluorescent-lit aisles feel even quieter, like the world beyond the automatic doors had been swallowed up. I brewed a cup of coffee, checking the cash drawers, organizing the paperwork for the closing shift, all the while feeling the hum of the store around me. It wasn't until around 11:15 p.m. that the night tilted on its axis. The automatic doors slammed open with a loud crash, startling me, and I froze for a split second. Then I saw them. 2 Masked men, moving with purpose, their guns drawn, eyes sharp and calculating even behind the fabric covering their faces. Every instinct I had screamed danger, but the surreal nature of it all slowed my reaction. "Everyone in the cooler, now!" one shouted, his voice sharp and urgent. The words barely registered before my body moved on autopilot. I ushered the associates toward the walk-in cooler, the cold air hitting us like a shockwave as we closed the door behind us. The metallic chill was biting, searing against our skin, making the situation feel all the more unreal. I glanced at the associates, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror. I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, just do what they say. No one needs to get hurt," I said. But the words felt hollow, even to me. The men were methodical at first, focused. On the registers, they demanded cash and valuables, barking orders with precise timing. I tried to keep my body tense but not noticeable, tried to anticipate their movements while also shielding the associates beside me. But tension doesn't protect you from panic, and it wasn't long before it escalated. One of the robbers grew impatient with a junior associate struggling to open the safe. Frustration radiated from him in waves. Then came the warning shot. The ricochet echoed off the metal walls like a clap of thunder in a confined space. The cooler's cold air did nothing to numb the jolt that went through my chest. Every associate froze, eyes wide, breath shallow. I gritted my teeth and tried to breathe steadily, muttering under my breath, "Stay calm. Don't move. Don't make a sound." It didn't work. Chaos erupted almost immediately. The gunman fired again, and the sound of bullets cracking through. The store was followed by screaming, the metallic clang of falling inventory, and the panicked footsteps of terrified employees. The cold floor beneath me felt slick and unreal, as though the world had shifted into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I crouched, shielding the two associates beside me, my heart hammering in my chest. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what people warn you about. Nothing prepares you for this. I tried to keep control, instructing the associates in whispers. "Keep low, stay quiet, don't make sudden moves, breathe." But fear has a language of its own, and their eyes betrayed every ounce of it. One of the men approached the cooler, muttering orders I couldn't catch. My mind raced. Do I try to reason? Do I stay silent? Every option seemed equally futile. When the police finally arrived, the aftermath was worse than anything I could have imagined. I lost count of the people around me, friends, colleagues, strangers, whose lives had ended in minutes. 5 people were gone, victims of a greed that seemed senseless in its magnitude. Others were gravely injured, including me. I took several gunshot wounds, though luck and rapid EMS response kept me alive. I lay in the hospital bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Survivor's guilt pressed down hard. I kept replaying every decision I'd made, or hadn't made, in those minutes. Could I have done something differently? Could I have saved more lives? The questions haunted me long after the physical wounds healed. Returning to the store weeks later was surreal. The aisles were empty, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and fear. Everything seemed normal, but nothing felt the same. Every time I walked past the registers, I saw the outlines of the victims in my mind's eye. Every empty aisle echoed with the terror of that night. I began giving talks about workplace safety, speaking to other retail employees about the importance of preparation, mental awareness, and vigilance. I stressed situational awareness, practicing emergency protocols and understanding that even a routine day can turn life-threatening in a heartbeat. My voice sometimes shook as I spoke, memories clawing to the surface. People listened politely, but they couldn't truly understand unless they had lived it. The recovery process wasn't just physical, it was psychological. I couldn't sleep without reliving the gunfire, the screams, the helplessness. I avoided nighttime errands, haunted by imagined shadows and the sound of rain against asphalt, I realized that trauma doesn't vanish just because the immediate danger is gone. It lingers, a weight in the chest and a shadow in every quiet moment. Months passed, but the memory refused to fade. I returned to Walmart, trying to regain a sense of normalcy, walking the aisles as though each step could reclaim the control that had been stolen. Every clerk, every customer, every routine action became a reminder that life can unravel in an instant. I started training employees not just on sales or stocking, but on awareness and emergency response. I emphasized small things, noticing people's behavior, identifying exits, understanding emergency procedures, staying calm under stress. These weren't skills anyone wanted to practice, but they were necessary. Every precaution, every protocol, was a barrier against the possibility of another nightmare. At night, when the store was empty and the storm clouds rolled in, I sometimes caught myself staring at the doors, imagining the worst. But I also reminded myself that fear, though persistent, can be managed. Preparation and awareness are the tools that allow you to navigate life when chaos strikes. Years later, I still think about that night. I still see the faces, hear the sounds, feel the cold of the walk-in cooler. The trauma never fully leaves, but it taught me resilience and the value of preparation. I learned to respect life's fragility, to appreciate the moments of safety that we often take for granted. Every day when I step into a store, I carry that memory quietly. I watch, I listen, and I stay aware. Not because I expect another tragedy, but because I know how quickly routine can become chaos. I know how unpredictable life is, and I carry that knowledge with humility. Life can change in an instant. Ordinary days, mundane routines, and familiar surroundings can transform into moments of extreme danger, often without warning. The lesson isn't just to survive, it's to remain vigilant, to prepare, and to protect yourself and others whenever possible. Courage is not about fearlessness. It's about awareness, responsibility, and the ability to act with presence and clarity in the face of chaos. The fragility of life reminds us to respect every moment, every decision, and every life around us. I've always been a creature of routine. Work, apartment, errands, repeat. My small Richmond apartment offered little respite from the chaos of deadlines, emails, and the constant hum of city life. Grocery runs were my escape. Solo trips to stores like Walmart weren't just about picking up necessities. They were my rare moments of calm, a chance to walk slowly, think clearly, and feel the normalcy of everyday life. That Tuesday evening in March 2018, I left the office a little later than usual, my shoulders tight from a long day of presentations and meetings. The sun had long disappeared behind the city skyline, and rain had left the streets slick and reflective. By the time I pulled into the Walmart Supercenter on West Broad Street, the parking lot was half full, wet, and shimmering under the overhead lights. I grabbed my reusable bags, locked my car, and entered the store, enjoying the familiar smell of floor polish and refrigerated produce. At first, the store seemed peaceful, almost comforting. Certain aisles were blocked off for restocking, leaving me weaving through narrow passages in the produce section. I picked up a bag of apples, glanced at the oranges, and felt a slight tension in the air, though I couldn't place it. Then I noticed him, a man standing near the refrigerated shelves, pretending to examine yogurt. His eyes, however, were fixed on me. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he hadn't seen me. But the moment stretched longer than normal eye contact should. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the sense of being observed in a space I thought was neutral. I shifted to another aisle, moving toward cleaning supplies, and he followed. Always a few steps behind, blending into the aisles, yet impossible to ignore. I fumbled for my phone under the guise of checking a shopping list and sent a quick text to my roommate. In Walmart, weird guy following, not sure what he wants. Just FYI. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed, glancing around, noting every movement he made. He maintained the polite veneer of a casual shopper, but there was something in the way he mirrored my path, a subtle mimicry that set off alarms in my head. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe I was overreacting. But that unease stayed lodged in my chest as I moved through the aisles, watching his eyes flicker to mine whenever I paused. It wasn't overt aggression, no yelling, no sudden movements. But the tension was palpable, a silent pressure, pressing against my rational mind. By the time I reached the checkout lane, I felt exposed. He lingered in the aisle, still watching. I hurriedly scanned my items, muttered the total, and grabbed my bags. My hands were clammy, my pulse racing. As I pushed the cart toward the exit, relief washed over me, but only momentarily. I glanced back through the sliding doors, and there he was, standing near the parking lot, leaning casually against a cart, calm, composed, yet undeniably aware of me. That night, I lay in bed replaying the encounter. Questions swirled. Who was he? Why me? Was it coincidence? Or had he been watching me for longer than I realized? Sleep didn't come easily. I felt vulnerable in ways I hadn't before, realizing that ordinary spaces, the aisles, the checkout line, even the fluorescent-lit store, could feel like a trap in the hands of someone fixated. Over the next few weeks, the memory gnawed at me. I avoided that Walmart for as long as I could, choosing smaller convenience stores, curbside pickups, anything to reduce the anxiety gnawing at my chest. But life demanded errands, groceries, and mundane necessities. I couldn't hide from routine, forever. A month later, at a corporate networking event downtown, I saw him again. Victor. I didn't know his name yet, but the moment our eyes met, recognition struck. His face was emotionless, detached, yet he seemed to recognize me immediately. He worked as a manager at a nearby chain restaurant. I felt my stomach knot. The same calm, polite intensity in his gaze sent my heart racing. I maneuvered to the other side of the room, avoiding him, slipping out early. Once outside, the cold air did little to ease the tension still clinging to my shoulders. I realized then that fear doesn't always announce itself with threats. Sometimes it's subtle, creeping along, settling like a shadow that doesn't leave even when the immediate presence is gone. At work, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. Hallways, stairwells, elevators. I noticed exits, security cameras, who was around me. My phone never left my hand in unfamiliar places. Small, cautious habits became second nature. I replayed strategies, ways to keep myself safe, even if the risk seemed minor. The anxiety was exhausting, but it was necessary. I confided in my roommate one evening. He followed me in Walmart, then at that event. I can't explain it, but I can't shake it. She nodded, listening. You have every right to feel uneasy, Elena. Trust your instincts. Her words grounded me. Instincts are powerful, often undervalued until circumstances demand reliance on them. Mine had screamed the first night, and I had ignored them too long. Months went by, but the unease never fully lifted. I became meticulous about where I went, when, and who was around. Dimly lit aisles, empty parking lots, late-night errands, all triggered memories of Victor's silent observation. I started carrying my phone in my hand, not just for calls, but as a precautionary measure. One evening, while shopping at a different Walmart, I noticed a man with similar posture and gaze. My heart jumped, adrenaline surged. I reminded myself to breathe, to assess calmly. It wasn't him, but the reaction lingered. My body remembered the tension before my mind fully caught up. I began researching personal safety, reading articles on situational awareness, stalking behaviors, and boundary setting. Knowledge offered a measure of empowerment. Awareness became a shield, a tool to navigate spaces that once felt neutral. The experience shaped more than just my habits. Social interactions, once casual, became scrutinized. I paid attention to small cues, micro-expressions, and repeated patterns of observation. It wasn't paranoia. It was vigilance, a learned instinct. Even professional settings required caution. Meetings in restaurants, conferences, networking events. I considered exits, potential blind spots, the number of people present. I learned to move with intention, aware of my surroundings without letting fear dictate every choice. I shared my story with a trusted colleague, emphasizing the subtlety of Victor's behavior. He didn't yell or threaten, but the pattern, the timing, the attention, it's invasive, and that's enough to unsettle anyone. She nodded, understanding without judgment, validating the importance of boundaries. Years later, I still think about that night in Walmart, about the intensity of being watched without physical harm. Victor's polite smile, the way he followed without obvious confrontation, taught me that danger doesn't always arrive violently. Sometimes, it's the quiet persistence, the crossing of invisible lines that leaves the deepest mark. I've learned to trust my instincts, to assert boundaries, and to navigate the ordinary with awareness. Shopping, errands, even work. These everyday activities can carry unforeseen risks, but preparedness and attentiveness can reclaim a sense of safety. I still avoid dimly lit aisles whenever possible, glance over my shoulder when alone, and remain conscious of the people around me. I carry the lesson quietly, letting it inform decisions without letting fear dominate my life. Ordinary spaces can become unsafe when someone crosses boundaries. Danger is not always loud or overt. It can be subtle, patient, and persistent. The lesson is to trust your instincts, maintain awareness, and assert boundaries before fear becomes immobilizing. Safety is cultivated through vigilance, preparedness, and respect for your own limits. I've always been a meticulous person. Growing up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I learned early that organization wasn't just a habit, it was survival. My mother ran a small bookkeeping business, and my father worked in a factory, but they both insisted that attention to detail could separate you from mediocrity. That mindset carried me through school, into college, and eventually into the world of retail management. I liked structure, schedules, and knowing what to expect. By June 2017, I had been promoted to operations assistant at the Walmart Supercenter on East Market Street. My days revolved around inventory, employee schedules, and ensuring that shifts ran smoothly. On paper, it was a dream: responsibility, recognition, and a steady paycheck. But the reality was more complicated. Retail management is a pressure cooker, full of deadlines, impatient customers, and the constant balancing act between employees' needs and corporate expectations. Most days I thrived. I enjoyed the challenge. That's why Derek Hall had initially seemed like a godsend. As an assistant manager, he knew the system inside and out. Calm, articulate, and competent, he became my go-to for logistics and operational advice. I trusted him and often leaned on him when schedules conflicted or inventory ran low. But over the months, subtle changes began to surface. He showed up late. More often, sometimes smelling faintly of alcohol. Small errors by junior employees made him snap, and he increasingly micromanaged tasks I used to handle autonomously. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe he was overworked. But the intensity kept escalating. He scrutinized shift swaps, refused vacation requests, and demanded explanations for even minor deviations in workflow. I tried to stay calm, documenting everything while maintaining professionalism. It was a particularly busy Friday in June. The store had been hectic all day, and I was already on edge when I approved a week-long vacation request for a young employee. She had been looking forward to it, and her previous record justified the time off. But Derek didn't see it that way. Moments later, he stormed into my office, slamming the door behind him. His face was flushed, hands trembling as he waved a stack of papers. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," he shouted, knocking files from the desk. I froze, unsure how to respond. "Derek, calm down. Let's talk about this," I said, trying to maintain a level voice. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were wild and his words came faster than I could process. Junior employees outside the office peeked in, fear evident in their expressions. Then, without warning, he stormed toward the supply closet, muttering something incoherent. I felt a sickening sense of dread. Something about his behavior wasn't normal. My instincts screamed at me to act, but I was still rooted to the spot, hoping it was a momentary flare-up. Minutes later, screams echoed through the office. I realized with horror that Derek had grabbed a handgun from the supply closet. "Everyone on the floor, now!" I yelled, my voice cracking. My heart pounded as employees hit the ground, some screaming, others crying silently. I grabbed a phone and dialed 911, whispering the situation to the dispatcher while Derek ranted incoherently above us. The minutes stretched like hours. Derek paced, waving the weapon, shouting things that made no sense. I tried to maintain composure, instructing employees quietly to stay low, cover their heads, and remain silent. I could feel every pulse of adrenaline as my body reacted to every sound. The creak of shoes on tile, the rustle of paper, even the humming of fluorescent lights. When police arrived, the chaos escalated. Derek resisted violently, prompting officers to shout warnings. "He has a gun." The words ricocheted through the office like a shockwave. Shots were fired during the struggle. I ducked instinctively, praying that everyone would survive. Derek was hit multiple times and later died en route to the hospital, but the trauma remained for those of us who had witnessed the events unfold. After the immediate danger passed, the office was eerily silent, broken only by sobs and trembling breaths. I wandered through the aisles, surveying the aftermath, overturned chairs, scattered files, and the unmistakable scent of fear lingering in the air. I realized that everything had changed. My workplace, once predictable and structured, now felt fragile, unsafe, and profoundly human in its vulnerability. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and guilt. I questioned whether I should have noticed Derek's behavior earlier or acted differently when his anger first became apparent. My coworkers and I attended counseling sessions offered by corporate, and safety protocols were revised. But nothing could erase the memory of Derek's eyes, wild, angry, desperate, or the deafening echo of gunfire in an office that should have been mundane and secure. Returning to work was a test of courage. Every creak of a door, every shadow in the hallway triggered a flash of memory. I became hypervigilant, scanning the office for potential threats, while also balancing schedules and inventory. I started advocating for mental health awareness, encouraging employee check-ins and proposing proactive measures to identify signs of stress or instability before they escalated. Over time, I learned to cope. Awareness became a skill, vigilance, a habit. I could navigate my workplace without letting fear dominate, but the memory of that day never fully disappeared. It served as a constant reminder that human behavior is unpredictable and that personal struggles, when unaddressed, can escalate into unimaginable consequences. I continued to work in retail management, but with a renewed perspective. I listened more, intervened earlier when issues arose, and encouraged an environment where stress and mental health challenges could be addressed openly. The incident didn't define me, but it reshaped how I approached responsibility, safety, and empathy. Workplaces are not immune to the fragility of human behavior. Stress, unchecked personal struggles, and untreated mental health issues can escalate quickly, transforming ordinary spaces into dangerous ones. The lesson is to remain vigilant, attentive, and compassionate, recognizing early warning signs, prioritizing mental health, and maintaining clear safety protocols can prevent tragedy and protect both employees and the community. Awareness, empathy, and preparation are the tools that transform vulnerability into resilience. I've always been careful. Growing up in Springfield, Ohio, my parents drilled one lesson into me. Trust your instincts, especially when something feels off. I learned early that awareness could protect you, whether it was crossing the street, safely avoiding sketchy neighborhoods, or watching out for strangers. Those lessons stayed with me long into adulthood, especially after becoming a single mom. Raising Sophie alone meant that my vigilance was no longer just about me. It was about keeping her safe too. By September 2019, my life had settled into a predictable rhythm. I worked at a small bakery downtown, finishing shifts that stretched into the late afternoon. Once home, I prepared Sophie's snacks, helped with homework, and sometimes ran errands before dinner. Walmart trips had always been part of that rhythm. Quick, necessary, uneventful. I knew the store layout, the checkout lines, even the employees who worked evenings. Nothing ever felt threatening. Until that September evening. It was around 7 p.m., cloudy and cool for early fall, when Sophie and I approached the Walmart on Pine Street. She chattered excitedly about her day at school, dragging her small backpack behind her. I noticed a man near the cart return, a tall, bald man scrolling on his phone. My instincts whispered unease, but I brushed it off. Perhaps he was waiting for someone or taking a break from work. I guided Sophie toward the entrance, holding her hand tightly. Inside the store, I kept an eye on him without making it obvious. That sense of being watched persisted even as we moved through the aisles. When I turned toward the cereal section, I caught a glimpse of him again, standing at the end of the aisle, casually observing. My chest tightened. This wasn't random. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. When something feels wrong, trust it. I pulled Sophie closer, whispering to stay near me. She giggled nervously, unaware of the tension building in my chest. Over the next few weeks, the encounters escalated. The man appeared at different times, always near us, always watching. Sometimes he asked casual questions. Does Sophie go to Pine Street Elementary? Or do you live around here? As if he knew details he shouldn't. Each time, I excused us politely, moving to other aisles, always scanning for exits or employees who could intervene. The fear was subtle at first, but it grew into an undercurrent I could no longer ignore. Even simple trips became exercises in observation and caution. At night, I lay awake, replaying each encounter. I thought about our routines, walking to the car, the aisles we preferred, the timing of our visits. I realized how vulnerable ordinary habits could make us. The Walmart parking lot, once a neutral, familiar space, now felt like an arena where we were being scrutinized. I began talking to friends cautiously, seeking reassurance, though I knew I had to act on my instincts rather than wait for someone else to notice. One evening, after a late shopping trip, the man's presence became undeniable. Sophie and I were loading groceries into the car when a light knock rattled the window. My heart slammed in my chest. I froze for a moment before realizing it was the man outside. Calmly, I locked the doors, pressing Sophie close to me, telling her to stay quiet. Every instinct screamed danger. My hands shook as I started the car, pulling out of the space quickly, nearly leaving bags behind in my panic. That night, I called Walmart's security department. Explaining the situation, I detailed the repeated sightings, the personal questions, and the unsettling behavior. They promised to investigate, to keep a record of the man's visits, and to coordinate with local authorities if necessary. Knowing someone official was watching provided a small measure of relief, though. The tension in my chest didn't disappear entirely. The discovery that he had recently been released from a mental health facility and had a documented history of stalking women confirmed my fears. My anxiety became justified. The world felt more precarious than before, and I realized I couldn't rely solely on Walmart or the police to ensure our safety. I had to take personal precautions. I installed security cameras at home, checking the feed obsessively each evening. I changed our routines, visiting stores at different times, taking alternative routes, keeping doors locked the moment we left the vehicle. I even enrolled in self-defense classes, thinking it absurd that a small change like carrying pepper spray could offer some psychological comfort, but it did. Every small act of preparedness helped reclaim a fraction of the control I had lost. Sophie began noticing the changes. "Why does that man keep showing up, Mommy?" she asked one afternoon, her voice tinged with curiosity and unease. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes people make mistakes and follow rules that aren't theirs to cross. We just have to be careful, okay?" She nodded, accepting my explanation, but I could see the subtle tension creeping into her small body, reflecting the stress we had absorbed together. Months passed. The man's visits eventually ceased, but the aftermath lingered. Grocery trips remained tense, and I found myself scanning parking lots and aisles, scanning for anything out of place. I realized that trauma isn't just in moments of confrontation, it's in the shadow it leaves behind, the subtle adjustments we make to protect ourselves from a danger that may never fully materialize again. I began sharing my experiences with friends cautiously, emphasizing awareness, vigilance, and trust in instincts. The story wasn't just about fear, it was about learning to balance normal life with precaution. I knew that giving in to paranoia would paralyze us, but ignoring it completely could leave us vulnerable. The balance was delicate and the lessons were constant. Now, years later, I reflect on that experience often. Even though the man stopped appearing, my vigilance became part of my identity. I drive different routes, vary our routines, and maintain awareness of our surroundings, not out of obsession, but as a habit of self-protection. Walmart and other public spaces will always be part of life. They are ordinary places that require extraordinary awareness at times. The incident taught me that safety isn't guaranteed, but preparedness and intuition can minimize risk. I remain cautious but not paralyzed, alert without being consumed by fear. I carry the lesson quietly, letting it guide my decisions without letting it dominate my life. Sophie, though, young at the time, absorbed the lessons of awareness and prudence as well, and I hope she carries them forward too. Ordinary spaces can become threatening when someone crosses boundaries, even subtly. Fear is valid, but action and preparedness restore control. Trusting instincts, varying routines, and seeking help when needed are crucial in protecting oneself and loved ones. Safety is cultivated through vigilance, awareness, and proactive measures, not luck alone.